Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Sansa had hoped the worsening weather would drive everyone indoors that morning so she could say goodbye to Jon in privacy. In a castle populated by hardened Northmen, she should have known better. Wrapped in her own furs, she kept her distance while Jon helped load up the pack mules for their outward journey to the Riverlands. Every so often he stopped and turned around, meeting her gaze and causing her to look away, feeling almost abashed. In those moments, she remembered the kiss they stole. The one ended so abruptly by the arrival of a messenger from the Freys, so sudden they hadn't the time to talk about it afterwards. Now she knew she would have to wait months on end for that conversation. It would be like waiting for dawn in the midst of the long night. After the shock of her marriage to Tyrion, followed so swiftly by the horrors of Ramsay Bolton, she hadn't wanted this. Especially not with someone she and the world thought was her brother. She remembered Olenna telling her about her own late husband, about how he had been so busy looking at the sky that he rode his horse off a cliff. This, whatever it was she was feeling for Jon, felt much the same. One minute her 2 feet were firmly on the ground, the next she was crashing through thin air. Above her only the circling skies. It was a surprise, to say the least. "We're almost ready." Jon approached her with snowflakes melting in his hair, just as Robb had the last time she saw him. That was a goodbye, too. "Will you ride some of the way with us?" Reluctantly, she had to decline. "I had best stay here. I can't go too far from the castle." She wanted to, desperately. But she didn't want to draw out the pain of a farewell, not in front of so many others. For Sir Davos was going with them, to yield Dragonstone to Rhaegar, and in turn, Daenerys Targaryen. Meanwhile, Jon, Brynden, and the Tully men were headed for the Riverlands. It made her suspicious that they were going as well, like they were trying to involve Northmen in another catastrophic campaign in the south. "Don't let my uncle nag you into meddling in the affairs of Riverrun," she advised. "I know you won't, but I couldn't rest until I heard you say it out loud." Jon laughed dryly. "I promise you, I won't. Even if I wanted to, we haven't them in. We haven't any siege engines, and Sir Brynden says they're fully stocked for at least a year. I'm going to see if I can find Arya, then we'll be coming straight back." As they lapsed into silence, she suddenly found herself struggling to find something to say. Something other than what was already in her head. The silence drew itself out, and she began to hope he was thinking the same thing. She was, and now he was so close to her. She could see the shape of the snowflakes landing in his hair, melting to nothing. "I'm going to miss you," she said, finally. Her tone was choked and her throat felt constricted. "So much has happened since I came to you at Castle Black that your not being there is going to feel like the loss of a limb." He looked startled for a moment, as if he hadn't considered it. But he soon composed himself and managed to raise the ghost of a smile. "We won't be able to do that thing with the tree, like we could when I was stuck in the past. But I'll be thinking of you always, and that's got to count for something." "I almost forgot about that," she replied, flushing in the face. It seemed insane to her that she could have forgotten something so vital, but by the end of that whole episode, time traveling through a tree was something she had done so often it almost became mundane. She smiled faintly at the recollection before adding, "Well, even if it gets me nowhere, I'll come to the Godswood and pray daily for you." Despite the lack of privacy, he leaned in and kissed her. A chaste kiss, but that chastity was stretched as it lasted just that little bit too long. She felt her cheeks burn, but as she looked around, no one else seemed to have noticed. Life in Winterfell continued uninterrupted. Only Rhaegar, mounted on a fast and strong courser, was looking over at them. Now that she had seen him and Jon together so often, she could see the similarities between them. "Your father's waiting, so I best not keep you any longer," she said, ruefully. "Make the most of your time together, because I have a feeling all 7 hells will soon break loose before you all return." She heard the breath hitch in Jon's throat, his gaze suddenly dropping away from her own. He was about to walk away, even turning from her before abruptly changing his mind. After a few paces, he ran back to her and kissed her, one final time. "And when all 7 hells do break loose," he said between sharp breaths, "I'll be back and we'll face them together." Sansa took that as a solemn promise. Once he was gone, she climbed up the steps near the Barbican and walked out onto the battlements. From there, she watched the small host disappearing on the horizon. Ghost was the first to vanish from sight as he blended perfectly with the fresh snowfalls, only his ruby eyes were visible. When he stopped and looked back at her, then the sound of giant beating wings sounded from far behind her. She knew what it was, and she smiled as the dragon soon soared overhead, his silver-blue scales vivid against the dull gray skies. For the first time she realized what an extraordinary sight a dragon in flight truly was, and goosebumps prickled all along her arms. When they all returned, they would come with an army and 3 more where Sonyor came from. They would be invincible. The dragon was the first to vanish. Jon scanned the skies above, looking for him. Ghost, the direwolf, was usually enough to attract funny looks and dark glances, but he dreaded to think what kind of attention an adult dragon would bring. And, in their situation, all attention was unwanted attention. "He's behind the clouds," Rhaegar stated, brusquely. "I'm starting to wish I had left him behind now, just to stop you from worrying." Rhaegar was so on point that Jon felt affronted. "That's not what I was looking for." "Yes, it was," Rhaegar cut in. "You've been gawping at the sky ever since we left Winterfell. Well, stop it, he'll be good, and stay out of sight." Jon was far from satisfied. For all they knew, the weather in the south could well be decent. The next day may dawn bright and sunny, offering their secret weapon no chance of cover, but Rhaegar would not hear of leaving him behind. To his further dismay, Brynden Tully had become fascinated by the creature and offered no objection to his coming along too. Only Sir Davos, as ever, had intervened with words of caution. "I do think we should exercise a little discretion, Your Grace," he'd said to Prince Rhaegar. "And fire-breathing monsters, which haven't been seen on these shores in nigh on 2 centuries, don't leave much room for discretion. Not in my experience, anyway." Rhaegar took offense at his beloved dragon being described as a monster. Although fully briefed on Davos' life, Jon couldn't help but wonder what other monsters he'd encountered over the years. However, it was Brynden who settled the matter. "You sound like a pair of old women," he chortled, to Jon's annoyance. "Who cares if anyone sees the dragon? They won't be able to touch him, and they won't be able to prove he's with us." Despite his annoyance, Jon had been forced to agree. Rhaegar may have the looks of his family, but there was still no way anyone could prove the dragon was his. Besides, the dragon would be miles away most of the time, terrorizing small folk and devouring livestock. That veneer of protection now had to suffice. 2 full weeks after leaving Winterfell, and he still hadn't seen the dragon again. Weary from the rough ride through difficult terrain, they arrived at Moat Cailin, a crumbling edifice of a fortress that protruded from the surrounding land like broken teeth. It made him shudder to think that a collapsed bridge and a decayed tower was all that stood between the north and a southern invader. Sentiments seemingly shared by his traveling companions. "Catelyn always said this place was a death trap," said Brynden, dismounting his horse. "I'll take my chances in the death trap rather than spend another night out in the open." Rhaegar sounded less concerned. "What lies south of here? The Neck, isn't it?" "The Neck," Jon confirmed, although he had never been this far south himself. At least not in this lifetime. In his other lifetime, he'd been as far as Dorne. "There's a causeway that'll lead us safely through the swamps, though. If we show stark banners, the Cranagwin will let us through right enough." Or so Jon hoped. There had been so much fighting, he would not blame Lord Reed for distrusting anyone attempting to cross his land. He would have sent a raven declaring their intentions if he thought it stood any chance of locating Greywater Watch. The fortress was famous for forever being on the move. No raven ever found it. Even the last army that attempted to invade the Neck was still feeding the lizard lions that dwelled deep in their treacherous waters. To Rhaegar's intense dismay, however, it was as cold inside the tower as it was outside. Colder even. Jon tried not to laugh as he watched his father attempting to light a fire in vain. Not normally a problem for someone of his name. Gently nudging him aside, Jon took the flint himself and soon managed to catch a spark on some of the dry wood. Davos has piled in the hearth. He blew gently on the catching flames, helping them to spread. "Thanks," said Rhaegar. "I suppose you learned that north of the wall." "I've always known how to light a fire," Jon protested. He hadn't meant to sound like he was chiding him, but now Rhaegar appeared abashed. Reddening and rocking back on his heels, away from the smoking hearth, as if trying to discreetly disappear. "Forgive me," he softly said when his efforts to vanish failed. "I think you must know a great deal, many practical things that any other prince wouldn't have the first clue about. Things that I could never have taught you." The words "any other prince" jarred in Jon's head, compelling him to staunchly correct the other man. "That would be because I'm not a prince." Rhaegar looked even more dismayed. I understand. Your life has not been what it was meant to be. Neither your mother nor I ever intended this for you. And I'm very glad I'm not a prince, Jon interjected. He was no longer looking at his father, keeping his eyes trained on the blossoming fire. The chimney was blocked, but the blockage cleared itself before the room could get unbearably smoky. Still, his gray eyes reddened and watered as the acrid fumes stung at him. After a moment, he drew a deep breath and regretted being so waspish with his father. When he hadn't meant to be so in the first place. I'm just glad I'm not a prince, because I wouldn't have wanted everything handed to me on a plate. What I have in this life, I earned. I wouldn't swap any of that to be a pampered, spoiled prince. Is that what you think of me? Rekar asked, sounding stung. That everything's been given to me because of who I am. That I'm pampered and spoiled. Because the truth is, and surely you realize this, is that I lost everything because of who I am. Jon had rolled his eyes before he could stop himself. At which Rhaegar was on his feet, huffing indignantly. I didn't mean... But he was cut off by the door slamming behind Rhaegar's back. He sighed heavily as a cloud of dust and loose plaster cascaded down from the overhead rafters, making him sneeze. Instead of running after his father, he turned back to the fire and tried to lift his temper by warming his hands against the growing fire. When that failed to work, he looked around the tower he was in, wondering how they were going to raise the funds to completely repair it. Moat, Cailin needed to be permanently manned again. The Ironborn attacks proved that pondering the repairs of Moat Cailin did not work for long either. Ghost came to join him, the fur around his maws red from a recent kill. Deer? Or so Jon hoped. The dire wolf sniffed at him, nuzzled his face, and licked his cheek. His pink tongue was rough against his unshaven face, making him wince. The smell of blood coming from the wolf made him want to gag. Jon was in no mood to play. Not now, boy. Go and hunt again. Ghost hesitated, his red eyes dull in the poor light. Inwardly, Jon groaned at the thought of having pissed off another of his nearest and dearest. He said nothing as Ghost padded toward the door hesitantly as though Jon might change his mind. However, he did not and continued staring glumly into the fire. He was leaving the north, he realized, and all he wanted was to go back home. Sansa spread an old cloak out beside the pool of the Godswood and carefully sat down. Leaning over the edge of the large pond, she could see where the roots of the heart tree winding away into the unfathomable depths of the still water. When she was little, she thought the lake was enchanted, and she had loved that. Now, her adult self thought she might not have been too far wrong after all. There was a peculiar form of magic at work in the north, a type most had lost touch with a long time ago, but she had seen it, felt it, and she needed it now. Gingerly, she dipped her hand in the icy cold water and suppressed a shiver. Persevering, she wrapped one hand around the root and held it tight. It wasn't long before her fingers began to tingle, quickly turning her whole immersed hand numb with cold. Closing her eyes, she willed herself back with Bran, far beyond the wall in the three-eyed crow's tree. Bran, she whispered, hoping beyond hope that he could hear her. Arya's in the Riverlands. We need to reach her to tell her Jon's gone searching for her. Holding her breath, she kept her eyes closed and waited. She barely knew what she was waiting for, because Bran couldn't just materialize in present-day Winterfell like he did the historical Harrenhal. She knew that, but she waited for a sign, but all that happened was that the wind sighed through the trees, sending down a shower of ruby-red leaves. She opened her eyes in time to see one flutter down to the surface of the lake. When it landed, it didn't cause so much as a single ripple before gliding away from her. The cold began to burn, the way that cold sometimes does. Nothing burns like the cold. She had heard someone say once, she had forgotten who, but it no longer mattered. He was right, whoever he was. Involuntarily, she released her grip on the tree root and nursed her aching hand. Maybe Bran had heard her through the roots on the endless unseen network that connected all the weirwoods in Westeros. If he had, he gave no fathomable sign. But that night, she slept and she dreamed. The crow showed her its third eye, then the vast wolf pack racing through the Riverlands. They moved as one vast host, led by a huge she-wolf, twice the size of her subordinates. Nymeria, a voice in her head whispered clearly. It sounded like Bran. Arya, she tried to reply. Before she could form her sister's name, she saw the river and the breath was stolen from her body. The whole river was ablaze, lighting up the night sky in oranges and reds. The shadow of a great winged beast spat more fire. sending the small folk fleeing toward the burning river, and they had no place left to run. Sansa tried to scream, but the scene shifted again. She saw her sister alone in a crowded room. But when she tried to reach Arya, her face had completely changed, and it wasn't Arya at all. Sansa tried to catch her again, but found herself on a hillside overlooking vast swamp. A lone man stood on the prow of a tiny boat, his face obscured by a deep hood as he poled his way northwards. She squinted and shielded her eyes to get a better look at him, but the more she did so, the darker and fuzzier it got. It was a while before she realized she had woken up in her dark chamber. It was the fires that had stayed with her. The burning small folk running for the rivers, hoping to find a watery refuge, only to be met by more fire. Rivers of fire. It made her want to vomit. Jon awoke at dawn, shivering and hungry. Breakfast consisted of stale bread and hardened cheese procured from Brereton on their way down. He washed it down with some small ale, wincing against the sickly taste. He couldn't see where the others were, except Rhaegar. It seemed he had not returned indoors the night before, and was out there still. Jon could see him, sat on a hillside, looking out over the neck. Memories of their previous day's row came back to him in an instant, making his breakfast weigh heavily in his stomach. Unlike pampered princes, he knew when he was in the wrong. Accordingly, he pulled on the coat that Sansa had made for him before wrapping some bread and cheese in a clean cloth. When he joined his father on the hillside, he handed over the food. "Here," he said. "I thought you might be hungry." It appeared that Rosier was ignoring him. Although inclined to leave him to it, Jon remained at his side and suppressed a sigh. However, the prince soon gasped, genuinely startled that Jon had suddenly appeared at his side. "You must have been miles away," Jon laughed, pressing the food into his hand. "I said you must be hungry." "Forgive me," he replied, accepting the peace offering. "My head was in the clouds." "I think it's I who ought to be asking forgiveness," said Jon quietly. "You're my father, and you deserve more respect than I showed you. I'm sorry." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Rosier assured him, "and nothing to forgive. Children are allowed to test the patience of their parents." All the same, Jon had his regrets, but he left them unspoken. At least it was a beautiful morning. The prince opened up the cloth and picked at his light breakfast, sharing it with Jon. Meanwhile, they watched the mists part, revealing the endless waterways covering the neck. When he squinted, he could just make out the causeway that provided the one safe route to the Riverlands. "You were deep in thought when I first came to you," Jon noted. "What was on your mind?" "Daenerys," he answered. He had never met his sister, and Jon was surprised it took this long for her to come up in casual conversation. When Rhaegar volunteered no further information, Jon prodded him gently. And still Rhaegar hesitated. To phrase it politely, "I am concerned she inherited the family's eccentric streak. She is my father's daughter, after all, and I have no intention of marrying her, so you needn't try to make me." Jon almost choked on his own laughter. "Of course no one will make you marry her. Those brother-sister marriages are probably why there's a streak of madness in our family in the first place." "It's as well Sansa, and you aren't siblings then," Rhaegar replied, grinning now and unbothered by the swift change of subject. However, Jon was taken aback. "There's nothing, nay, less than nothing going on between Sansa and I. Now let's return to Daenerys. She's your sister and my aunt. I want to meet her. And, if she's mad..." He trailed off, considering the possible ramifications. A mad queen in control of 3 adult dragons. It made him shudder. "She's not married to Viserys, is she?" Rhaegar added. He was a sweet child, but started to show the madness as he got older. "Sansa said there were rumors of his death at court," replied Jon. "As for Daenerys, they say she married a Dothraki horse lord." Rhaegar turned to look at him, his expression utterly incredulous. "I thought you might be jesting." Jon shrugged. "That's what Sansa told me, and she overheard Uncle Eddard talking to Robert about it." "I'd wager the usurper loved that," Rhaegar laughed bitterly. "He couldn't have arranged a better match for her himself. As for my brother, I barely knew him." They lapsed into silence as they watched the sun rise higher in the sky. It was bright, as Jon had worried, but the dragon was nowhere to be seen. He noted, too, that Ghost was nowhere to be seen either. Hadn't been seen since the previous evening. Jon did not worry unduly. Ghost was always going off on his own north of the wall. He'd be back. He always was. Jon kept watching the green treetops of the neck, carpeting the valley floor and reclining into deep gray waters. He thought he saw some movement down there, then put it down to a trick of the shifting light. Sarah Bryndon told me Sarah Barristan Selmy was part of Robert's Kingsguard, Rhaegar continued. I was thinking about that too. Sarah Barristan was a friend of mine, well, clearly not anymore. Father, Sarah Barristan would have had no choice, Jon was quick to point out. I'd have fallen on my sword before swearing to serve that bastard. Still, I suppose he's dead as well now. The bitterness in Rhaegar's tone took Jon aback. I wouldn't know, Father. A lot's changed since you were here last, but take it as you find it. His advice was half-hearted, and he knew it. He'd become distracted by a figure poling a small boat up a waterway close to the northern border. Whoever he wasn't alone. Jon chided himself for not noticing them sooner, and he immediately felt his hackles rise. Get the others, he said darkly. We have uninvited guests. Jon shielded his eyes from the rising sun, squinting at the small group of men now disembarking from their small boats. They waded ashore, some of them knee-deep in swamp waters. His nerves settled. There wasn't enough to them to cause any real trouble. If that was what they even intended, he was almost embarrassed by his initial panic, until he remembered how stealthily that small group approached. More could easily have been waiting, hidden from view, but only if they were Cranogmen, he said aloud. They're Cranogmen. Not just any Cranogmen, either. The small sails on the boats were a deep gray-green, with a lizard-lion sigil emblazoned on them. Lord Reed himself, Rosie Argat added. They were making their way up the steep hill toward Moat Cailin now, swifter than Jon realized. He could soon make out their small, narrow frames, half the size of landed adults, quick and lithe. One moved ahead of the others, wrapped in a gray-green cloak with the hood still drawn over his head. He only removed it when he reached the top of the hill, a good 10 foot from where Jon and Rhaegar stood. Curious, he went to greet the man he'd heard so much about, but seen only rarely. There was Harrenhal, of course, but Jon assumed Howland would have forgotten him from that time, just as Benjen and his uncle Eddard had. If he was ever really there at all, and not some strange alternate version of it, he felt he had 100 questions to ask, but before he could even marshal his thoughts, the Lord of the Cranogmen had dropped to one knee. To Winterfell, we pledge the faith of Greywater, hearth and harvest, and we yield up to you, my lord. Our swords and spears and arrows are yours to command. Grant mercy to our weak, help to our helpless, and justice to all, and we shall never fail you, he intoned solemnly. Jon tried to intervene, to politely inform the man he was swearing to the wrong person, but by then the other little Cranomen had caught up and added their voices to Howland's. We swear it by earth and water, the chorused. We swear it by bronze and iron, Howland alone continued. They all spoke the last line simultaneously. We swear it by ice and fire. For a long moment, Jon stood there looking at the kneelers, at a loss for what to do next. Blurting out that he was not the Lord of Winterfell seemed rude, and just going with the moment felt like an affront to Sansa. It wasn't until Rhaegar nudged him sharply in the back, jolting him forwards, that Jon snapped out of his indecision. He turned sharply to his father, silently demanding some other clue as to what to do next. But Rhaegar only scowled at him, nodding to the newcomers. Do something, he mouthed silently. You're a great help, Jon thought dryly to himself. Pulling himself together, he stepped forwards and tried to summon a little authority. Well met, my lord, and be welcome. Here you will find meat and mead in our halls, a place by our hearth. He'd forgotten the rest of it, but had a feeling his reply was wrong anyway. The Reed's pledge of fealty was different to everyone else's. It was older, felt darker, and he had not heard it since he was a boy. Not that it mattered. Howland had risen from his kneeling position and stood looking up at Jon. I was on my way to Winterfell, my lord, to pledge directly to Lady Sansa, but it is you and your father I needs must speak with more urgently. Jon exchanged a look with Rhaegar, finding him equally surprised at how well-informed Lord Reed was. Forgive me, my lord and your grace, Lord Reed added, apologetically as he looked from Jon to Rhaegar. Clearly, he had sensed what they were thinking. You understand that Bloodraven and I— Of course, Jon interjected, laughing stiffly. You and he, I presume, have your ways of keeping in touch. As you can imagine, the Lord confirmed, raising a small smile. If I may be so bold as to suggest we find somewhere to talk. The shock appearance of the most reclusive lord in Westeros had startled the manners right out of Jon. After giving himself an inner shakedown, he quickly recovered himself and gestured toward Moat Cailin. It was all they had, since they couldn't very well go all the way back to Winterfell. Follow me, he said, leading the way. And apologies for Colin's run-down state. but we're headed farther south." "I understand," Howland replied. "I still need to speak with your cousin, of course, but my men will gladly guide you through the neck, taking you a much shorter route through the swamps." Jon was genuinely grateful and thanked the Lord accordingly as they made their way inside the ruins. There were only a few Cragmen with Lord Reed. That was how they always traveled, in small units that moved swiftly and could attack in the blink of an eye before melting back into the land. The land around them, their own environment, was their ally and their weapon. They used it with devastating ease, Jon knew. Not for nothing were they called the gatekeepers of the north. By the time they made it back to Moat Cailin's one remaining tower house, the hearth fire was burning again, and they were able to begin roasting fresh butchered lamb on a spit. Brynden Tully was able to procure mead from a cask brought down on one of their pack mules, and Sir Davos had managed to harvest fish from a nearby river. Wrapped in fresh green leaves, Jon could not identify. The fresh fish was tossed into the open fire to cook slowly without burning. Once the preparations were done, they gathered at the room's only trestle table, each man nursing a horn of mead, and Jon could finally gather his thoughts. "You were at the Tower of Joy," he said, looking to Howland. "My uncle told me as much, but no more." "What happened? What did you see?" Howland didn't reply immediately. His green eyes dimmed as he lost himself in memory. It was almost 20 years past, Jon reminded himself. "Princess Lyanna was already dead by the time I made it into the tower," he explained. It felt strange to hear her addressed as princess, but that's what she was. Lord Stark cradled her in his arms, silent and broken with grief. I tried to speak with him, but he could not hear me, so I loosened the grip of his hands where he held her, gently as I could. Only then did he seem to realize I was there in the room with him, and that Lyanna was not. Jon felt a lump forming in his throat. During his travel back in time, he had left the tower months before her death and had not seen it. While he was growing up, his uncle had not spoken of it. At first, Jon assumed it had been too traumatic for him. After he had learned the truth of who she was, he thought Eddard's silence on her death was part of the secret plan. Now, after hearing Lord Reed's account, he thought he might have been right the first time, after all. He could see Eddard now, a young man barely out of boyhood, cradling the sister he had cherished enough to carry her most dangerous of secrets to his own early grave. Sitting next to Jon, Rhaegar had taken to staring fixedly at the contents of his cup. "Was she in pain?" "I cannot say, Your Grace," Howland answered, honestly. "There was a lot of blood. I prepared her body myself, while Lord Stark traveled to Starfall with Dawn. For the love I bore her. Only the woman, Wella, handled her naked at the end. I didn't think it right that she be examined." He meant before the flesh was boiled from his mother's bones for her final journey back to Winterfell. Jon was grateful to Lord Reed for leaving out the details of the procedure. It was only afterwards, on the sailing back to the north, I learned of the solemn vow Lord Stark swore to your mother. Howland continued, looking back at Jon. "Princess Lyanna had heard of what happened to your half-brother and sister. She thought the same would happen to you, my lord. With her last breath, she pled with Lord Stark to take you, to protect you. He told me that after he made the promise, the fear left her and she died at peace. It was small consolation to Jon, but at least she had that final assurance, and he upheld it. To the end. "He never told a soul," said Brynden Tully, echoing Jon's thoughts. "Not even our cat." He remembered his last conversation with Catelyn. She had asked for his forgiveness, and he had walked away, giving her no answer. "Neither did I, my lord," Howland replied. "No one but us could know, and I wouldn't have been told had I not been there to see it for myself." Jon hadn't considered that. Howland knowing was one too many. "As it happens," Howland continued, "my knowing had its uses. Had Robert ever, somehow, learned the truth, then it would be to Greywater Watch that Jon would be taken. No one could reach the last Targaryen prince there, so I never left again, keeping our profile low and our eyes and ears peeled for the faintest whiff of rumor. That's how we operate." Only Brynden seemed unhappy. Had Catelyn known she could have helped, at the very least, she wouldn't have kept drawing attention to Jon through that feud she had with him. Jon doubted that he wasn't about to argue the point with Catelyn's own uncle. He suspected that, if she did know, she would only see him as an even greater danger to her children. He had grown up a fugitive, undercover so deep even he himself couldn't have been trusted with the truth. "With all due respect, Lord Tully, I think Jon had a right to know before Catelyn Tully," Rosier curtly stated. "Lord Stark could hardly compromise my son's safety by divulging all to a woman just because she had an unfortunate habit of making innocent children suffer for their father's sins. If anything, I would say that was all the more reason to keep his mouth shut on the matter. She had given him no reason to trust her. Brynden glowered in response. Most underhand, your grace. Had she known the truth, she would never have done half the things she did. Rosiera sniffed. She wouldn't have misunderstood half the things she did had she simply given Lord Stark a chance to explain before flying into a rage. What did Ned Stark expect her to do? Brynden shot back angrily. My niece is a highborn woman unaccustomed to having unknown bastards planted in her nursery. How was she meant to react? Most others would have left him in the woods to die. Gods, man, she has a brain between her ears, doesn't she? Rosier retorted, getting to his feet in anger. Didn't she find it odd that Ned went to get Lyanna and came back with only a baby? It's not as though anyone truly believed I'd abducted and raped Lyanna, so what did she think we were doing for all that time? Brynden drew a deep breath, folding his arms across his chest and looking at Rhaegar accusingly. If you hadn't have run off with Lady Stark in the first place, that war need never have happened. Oh, but who was it who really caused that little misunderstanding? Lord Tully. Rhaegar snorted in disgust. Some up-jumped little shit who was a member of your own household. Actually, wasn't Paddy Baelish under your care at that time? Brynden looked utterly outraged, and Jon wanted nothing more than to crawl under the table and hide. He sorted out conflict every day as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, but this was a conflict between a man he had come to love and a man whose respect he thought he could never win, but had against the odds. He looked to Brynden, silently pleading with him to back down. There was no chance of that. That boy was under my brother's care. Hoster was Lord of Riverrun. Your Grace, your brush with death appears to have affected your memory. Before Rosier could reply with more oil on the flames, Jon leapt to his feet and got between both of them. Enough, he snapped angrily. Both of you, that is enough. Please, let it be. Still positioned between the two men, he glanced apologetically at Lord Reed and drew several deep breaths to compose himself. After a long pause in which to let the tension drain, Jon met his father's gaze. Lady Stark didn't know anything and was told the same story as everyone else. You said yourself Lord Stark had no choice, and blaming Catelyn for not working it on her own is deeply unfair. So stop this, he said, calm but stern. He turned to Brynden and added, Lord Stark meant no slight against your family with this secret. My lord, his word was sacred, and he swore to his sister that no one would ever know. You knew him, you knew how he would have kept that promise to the very last letter. The standoff continued, with both men looking daggers at one another. Figuring that he stood a better chance at reasoning with his father, it was to him that Jon silently pleaded. Rosier could not ignore him. He sighed and slumped his shoulders before reaching across the table to Brynden. Forgive me, my lord, I spoke out of turn. I was not here to raise my son, and I took my anger out on your niece. To Jon's immense relief, Brynden shook Rhaegar's hand. There is nothing to forgive, your grace. Good, said Jon, looking to the lamb still on the spit and the fish baking in its fat green leaves. Now we can rescue our food before it burns. The Solar had become Sames's favorite place in Winterfell. It was shut off from the rest of the castle, making it quiet. It was small and snug, with an open hearth that the servants kept well fed, with pine logs that filled the air with a rich, sharp scent. There was a wine cabinet she could help herself to, and a bell that connected to the kitchens. She could sup here in the evenings with no more than one invited guest. Usually it was another lord, one with far more experience and wisdom than her. She could ask them for advice or just listen to anything they had to say. It was the sort of thing her father would have done, and she intended to honor the tradition. But on this particular night, it was not another lord sat beside her, it was her own mother. As hard as it was for her to think of this person as her mother, Lady Stoneheart, they called her, and Sansa shuddered to think. Why? Nor could she think why she had invited her mother here. Catelyn was as silent and emotionless as ever, as she stared vacantly into the open flames. Worse, Sansa could not share her supper with her, and sat there picking awkwardly at the food. Better still, the conversation was stilted at best. Jon's bringing Arya home, you know, she said. So I hope he comes home soon. We miss them both. Catelyn did know. Sansa had mentioned it 100 times. And Catelyn probably wasn't missing Jon all that much. For a while, the only sound to be heard was the crackling fire. I love him too, she blurted out. The words were out of her before she knew it, but she would not take them back. Even Catelyn turned to her, her neck moving in that stiff and crackling way that it now did. There was something like anger in her eyes, but Sansa didn't flinch. She had been so long a piece in someone else's game, including her mother's, that being in control of her own destiny had emboldened her too much to back down. "I was never married to Tyrion," she said, recalling that unhappy time. "He was already married to someone else, or so I was told. A girl Tywin chased away, but they were married all the same. Besides, our union was never consummated, so it was not a true union. As for Ramsay, well, I'm a widow now. There is no one left to decide my husband but me. Anyway, it's all too soon for that. But I know I love him. You were always keen for me to not look upon him as a brother, and I didn't. I suppose I ought to be grateful for that now. It would have been more difficult had I looked upon him as a full brother. But he isn't. I mean, he could marry Arya if he wanted, and they would be doing nothing wrong. But I don't think they could, because they see each other as siblings." She was thinking aloud, giving voice to the stream of thought going through her head. It was for no other purpose than straightening out her own clumsy thoughts and filling the terrible silences that fell between them. Now that Catelyn was largely incapable of answering back, it made things wonderfully uncomplicated. But it was not to last. Catelyn covered her throat, and the single word rasped like gravel from her dry throat. "Iron," she said, quickly followed by throne. Whatever it was Sansa expected, it wasn't that. "Our place is here in Winterfell," she murmured in reply. "The rightful king is still Prince Rhaegar." Before she could ponder it much further, an anxious-sounding knock came to the door. Startled, Sansa dropped her fork and made to answer. On the opposite side of the door, her new steward was standing beside a large man with a chain wrapped around his neck. But it wasn't Tybalt. "My lady," said the steward, "a visitor from the Citadel." Maester Marwin, the newcomer, brusquely cut the steward off and thrust one large hand in Sansa's direction. "A friend of Samwell Tarly's, as it happens. When I read his letter, I realized how much the Starks of Winterfell needed me." He was a large man, almost square in shape and unlike any maester she had ever seen. "Oh," she replied, belatedly shaking his hand. Does Sam know you're here?" Marwin looked rather taken aback. "I never realized I needed his permission." Sansa caught herself on. "No, of course not, master. Forgive me, please join me in the hall and we can talk." She tried to close the door before he could see inside to where Catelyn was still gazing into the fire, but it was too little. "So it's true then," he murmured, almost to himself. "The rumors are true." She didn't need to ask which rumors. From what she had heard, the Riverlands were alive with speculation about her mother's continued existence. However, she did hope the new maester would enlighten her as to what was going on. Without asking more, she led him to the great hall. However, before they went in, he handed her a scroll of parchment. "There's records at the Citadel," he murmured. "I trust you to keep it safe." She studied the scroll. It had curled at the edges and gone brown with age, but the seal was already broken when someone else had already read it. When she unrolled it, it was a simple document, a formal declaration of the annulment of the marriage between Rhaegar Targaryen and Ilya Martell. Initially, her heart soared. But then she read it again. "This won't be enough to prove Jon's legitimacy, though," she said. "Wasn't there another detailing the prince's marriage to my Aunt Lyanna?" Marwin shrugged. Tarly searched the archives for 4 days and 5 nights. He found nothing else. She raised a smile anyway. "My thanks, master. Jon will be grateful too." Come the dawn, and they were setting off again. Jon helped load up the pack mules, ready for the journey through the neck. At the end of this treacherous route, he hoped Arya awaited him, before Howland left for Winterfell. However, Jon took him aside. He found an alcove overlooking the wetlands of the neck, where they could speak privately. "I don't think I had the presence of mind to thank you for coming to us," he said. "So I'm saying it now. Thank you for everything, for keeping my secrets most of all." "I owed your mother a great debt," he replied. "She saved my life, and I could not save hers in return." Jon saw the regret in his eyes and was quick to reassure him. "The debt is more than repaid, my lord." Howland did not reply. Instead, he reached into his satchel and withdrew 2 scrolls of parchment. "Only with these is the debt repaid, my lord." Jon took them both, breaking the seal on one of them for the first time. It was a formal record, meant for the Citadel at Old Town, of the marriage between his mother and father. The sight of it made his eyes mist over, but the second stole the breath from his lungs, a formal record, also meant for the Citadel of his own birth. His name had been written in Eddard Stark's small, neat handwriting. It was clear for all to see: Jon Targaryen, son of Lyanna of House Stark and House Targaryen and Rhaegar of House Targaryen. Your uncle was the only person able to write the document, Howland explained. And Jon wasn't even your original name. But under the circumstances, it was so secret, Ned wouldn't even trust the Citadel with it. I understand, Jon assured him, his voice choked with emotion. And I thank you. It is I who owes you the great debt, my lord. He read the two documents one more time before placing them carefully in his own pocket. As soon as he returned to the retinue, he would lock them safely in the strong box they had brought with them. Meanwhile, Howland clasped his arm and Jon returned the embrace. Nothing else needed to be said. The net closed around Jon's small traveling party like a smothering embrace. One by one, their small boats had passed through a seemingly impenetrable wall of green foliage, only to emerge on the other side into a whole new world, a world not normally seen by the likes of land-dwelling men such as them. They were too big, too clumsy, and too accustomed to the ground staying firm beneath their feet. Here it was all marsh, swamp, and waterways punctuated by crannogs of varying sizes. Not even they remained in one place. One or two drifted in their wake as if following them before their course diverted and they were swallowed by the gray-green gloom that permeated all around them. Even by day, it was dark and menacing. The canopy of trees overhead blotted out the sun. At best, they passed beneath the places where the branches were thin and they caught a little dappled sunlight that fell in shafts from above. Then it was beautiful. The sunlight picked out the purple glow of the poison kisses growing on the banks, venomous leaves a splendor of color. The beauty blended with the omnipresent danger, masking it from the naked eye, and Jon began to understand why no invader had ever successfully taken the neck. Even the first men fell victim to this waterlogged death trap. Occasionally they passed a lizard lion who'd poke their snout above the surface of murky brown waters. He tried to feed one some salted beef, only to have a wiser Cranogman pull his arm back over gunwale. No, my lord, it'll swallow you whole, he warned. Like everything else in the neck, the danger of the beast lay hidden beneath the surface. When it rose from the water to snap at an unwary bird, it revealed its huge body and its long poisoned teeth sinking easily into flesh. The splash of it crashing back into the hidden depths almost capsized one of their little boats. By night, they set up camps on whatever floating crannog they could find. They were perfectly round islands floating south toward the riverlands. Some had dwellings built on, others did not. In the places where the land was sturdy, he could see the blurry dots of light from torches borne by Crannogan he could not see. When he did see them, he noted how swiftly and easily they moved across the treacherous land. They knew every sinkhole, every pit of quicksand, and every hidden current like the backs of their hands. This place is extraordinary, said Rogier one night. Have you ever been anywhere like it? All of them had managed to set up camp on the same crannog, but their added weight had slowed it down. Ghost curled at Jon's feet, perfectly relaxed in his new environment, and Jon knew he was among friends. I must say, Your Grace, I thought I knew every boat there was to know, Saradavos replied. But these are new to me, and I thought I'd never say that again. In truth, Jon thought, Davos had been having the time of his life, as he learned from the Cranagadan. Together they were navigating the watercourses, and the grizzled old sailor was an eager student. Rosierga, too, hadn't missed out on learning a new skill and had become adept at fishing with a Cranaganan's fine net. Some of the prince's catch was soon roasting on an open fire they'd managed to get going. Jon's efforts at learning to spear frogs had ended in comedic disaster. That night, as they neared the border with the Riverlands, they grouped together on the Cranshag and warmed themselves by the fire. Jon had spent the last few nights composing a letter to Sansa, ostensibly to update her on their progress. But now he'd covered the business end, and he wanted to stray into the personal, someone once told him. And that someone was more than likely Sam, that writing down one's finer feelings was much easier than speaking them aloud. For the first time, he realized there were some things even Sam had no knowledge of. Then, as he went to reach for his parchment, Rigag called them together. Tell us, Sir Brendan, what awaits us in the Riverlands, he asked. Without the Tullys for protection and the Freys in charge. It worries me. Before Brendan could say anything, Ser Devos spoke and echoed what Jon was thinking all along. We'll emerge from these swamps close to Seagard. House Mallister has served both House Tully and House Stark faithfully. That would be my first port of call. By the look on Brendan's face, Jon could tell it was bad news. Patrek was captured at the Red Wedding, my lords, when Blackwalder threatened to hang him. Sir Jason surrendered the castle. Jon knew and had always thought highly of Sir Denys Mallister. The news grieved him. Where are they now? All prisoners, Brendan replied, held inside Seagard itself, as best I know. Sir Janis should have been Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Jon thought to himself, and the last election was Mallister's last chance. Is Blackwalder still in Seagard? He asked, looking to Brendan, or will he have left to attend his father's funeral? More than likely, Brendan confirmed. If not for the old man's funeral, then to stake a claim to the twins. He's not the rightful heir, but I wouldn't put it past him to organize his brother's untimely demise. Who is his heir? Jon was endlessly bewildered by the old lord's heirs. Having died at the age of 90, there were several generations of Froes waiting in the wings, and he couldn't name a single one of them. But Brendan was better informed. His great-grandson, Edwin Frey, Edwin's father, Reimagined Frey, was killed not a few months ago, and he was the son of Steffron Frey, who was Walder's eldest son by his first wife, Para Royce. Tully explained. Steffron, of course, died fighting alongside King Robb at Oxcross. Jon tried to commit all that to memory, but all that mattered to him was that Blackwalder was probably long gone from Seagard. All that remained to trouble him was the unanswered question of who had been left at Seagard in Frey's place. For sure, they wouldn't have left a prized jewel like that unguarded. Really, he said, all that matters is that we can get past both the twins and Seagard unmolested by Frey's men. But if the Mallisters are now sworn to them... Brendan cut him off with a loud choking noise, like a large chicken bone had caught in his throat. Horse shit, he snorted. The Mallisters will turn at the first opportunity. They served House Tully and House Stark as faithfully as any true Northman served them. It was their men who let me pass in the first place. Opposite Jon, with the campfire burning between them, he noticed Rhaegar looking at him, studying him intently. But when their gaze met, the prince quickly looked away again and poked at the cooking fish with a long stick. Once they had eaten, Jon returned to his letter to make use of the firelight before it died away. He included the information about House Frey taking over Seagard, but stopped short of asking Sansa for reinforcements. Then he stopped as he tried to frame the words in his head, words to express some finer sentiment. Every time he thought of something, he thought again and cringed at how embarrassing it all sounded. Who are you writing to? Rhaegar asked. His arrival was so abrupt that Jon startled. Even while his heartbeat still raced, his gut instinct was to hide the letter as best he could. No one, he answered defensively, but Rhaegar wasn't fooled. By no one you mean Sansa. I take it. Jon felt the color rising in his face and thanked the gods. It was now almost too dark to see. Now don't blush, his father teased. I've already told you you're doing nothing wrong. Anyway, it's a fine match, in my estimation. How could it not be? You're a Targaryen prince, and she's Wardeness of the North. Once you have Arya and Bran back, you can set them up in Winterfell and bring Sansa south. Jon was mystified. What are you talking about? Sansa and I will rule the North together. Should it come to a true match, we have no business in the south. Rhaegar hesitated, looking genuinely mystified. But you are a prince of the realm. Have you told Cersei that? Jon cut over him. I've already told you, neither Sansa nor I have any interest in the Iron Throne. I have come south to find Arya and bring her home, where she belongs. But is that true? A small voice asked from the back of his mind. He thought about the Mallisters again, prisoners in their own keep, ruled over by Blackwalder Frey. None of that would have happened had they not sworn their swords to Robb. Now the Starks were restored to Winterfell, and turning their backs on their former allies. Allies who continued to suffer the consequences of a Stark rebellion. In growing frustration, Jon pushed the letter away. What can we do? There are 4 of us and 1 dragon. And a dire wolf, Rhaegar pointed out. And you heard Brendan. The Mallisters' men are waiting, or the right time to strike. We can raise them, Jon. We can rally the townsfolk as well. They all want the Freys gone. And then what? Asked Jon. I have no interest in abandoning my people in the north to carve out a fat little kingdom north of the Trident. I will not repeat Robb's mistakes. No one's telling you to do that, Rhaegar hissed, keeping his voice down despite his mounting frustration. But the Riverlords fought for you too. If they wanted you to help take Winterfell, they couldn't because they'd already lost everything fighting for the Starks in the first place. Jon could no longer meet his gaze. He knew all this and more. The Northern Lords will not send men to die in another Southern war. Sansa and I promised them we would never even insult them by asking. But Eddard Stark would not have turned a blind eye to this mess. Still, Jon remained silent. Take the realm, Jon. Rosier spoke so softly. Starting with the Riverlands, take the realm. What about Daenerys? She has no claim compared to you, he cut in quickly. You can do this, Jon. You're a Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, who had warring wildlings fighting on your side. You're a leader of men. Take the realm. Rosier had gone from being the father he never knew. He had to being a little devil sitting on his shoulder. Take the realm. Take the realm. He made Westeros sound a little sweet cake, just conveniently sitting there for the taking. Jon's jaw clenched, unable to voice any further protest. You have the North, Rosier pressed on. You have the Vale and you could take the Riverlands while the Freys are still in disarray. So take it. Jon's brow creased, tightening into a frown. The Lords of the Vale could reach the Riverlands in a matter of weeks, he thought to himself. All he had to do was get Sansa to ask that besotted little cousin of hers. The same cousin who owes her his life since she exposed Littlefinger's plan to dispose of him. I cannot, Jon insisted. He remembered the documents Lord Reed had given to him, proving his birth and legitimacy. They were locked in a strong box now, safe. I cannot, he reiterated. He reached for his letter again and began to write. The glass vial caught the light, making the blue liquid inside shine like molten sapphires. Sansa smiled at the sight of it, but she could not guess at what it was. Meanwhile, Marwin dangled it in front of her face, almost teasingly. She looked from the vial to the maester and back again, as though searching for clues. I give up, she said. What is it? The gruff-looking maester smiled a victorious smile. Shade of the evening. Sansa was still none the wiser. What does it do? Before answering, Marwin replaced the crystal vial in his battered leather satchel and buckled it carefully. Once it was secure, he explained, You have your bone-white weir woods with red leaves. You eat the paste of that tree and you can explore history. Sansa had done it herself and nodded her head. Yes, my brother told me all about it. But did you know about the black ironwoods with the blue leaves that, if made into shade of the evening, will show you the future? No, she admitted. We have ironwoods here in the north as well, but not ones with blue leaves that make a potion. They grow in the east, Marwin clarified. You see, my lady, everything in this world is balanced. The power of the weirwoods in Westeros is countered by the power of the eastern ironwoods. Here, you have your green seers and wargs. In the east, they have their blue-lipped warlocks. The Northmen have their old gods. The Southerners their new gods. Your late aunt was ice, and your uncle by marriage is fire. Your cousin, their son, is the perfect balance of both. At least, according to the prophecy, and prophecy is a treacherous bitch. Sansa held back and looked out over the empty hall they were in. The Northern Lords were still hunting what they could before winter closed in, and the winter promised to be harsh. Where's the balance in that? She wondered. That was the prophecy that Rilgar believed in, she said aloud. But what of the warlocks you mentioned? You said they drink that stuff all the time, so they must know what's coming if it shows them the future. Surely they already know who the prince that was promised is, and how the war against the dead will play out. A look of regret crossed the maester's features. Alas, the Mother of Dragons took the liberty of destroying their temple with the warlocks inside it. Sansa remembered the dreams she had had. The river of fire, the small folk burning inside their holdfasts. She had long since stopped trusting her dreams to just be dreams. If I drank it, what would happen? She asked. Marwin smiled, reaching for his satchel again. Nothing is ever straightforward, my lady. You will see the future, but you will see the past, and you will see things that could have been, but never were. You will see things that might be, if only you take another path in life. Interspersed, throughout will be snippets of your fate. Some have gone mad trying to decipher which were the real thing. He found the vial again and handed it to her. Sansa held it delicately in the palm of her hand, suddenly feeling reticent. But what use is it if it only shows you fragments that can't be trusted? Marwin shrugged his broad shoulders. That's the danger. That's the risk you take. Like I said, everything's in balance. She could feel herself being led down a path of temptation, and she made no effort to stop it. But she resolved to do nothing with the vial just yet. What she did do was pull out the stopper, breaking a small wax seal before taking a sniff at it. For such a pretty substance, the odor was repellent. Rotting meat, spoiled milk, and something else. Something equally foul she couldn't quite put her finger on. Wincing, she replaced the stopper and set it aside on the table. "It's no lady's perfume," Marwin noted. "Initially, it tastes like it smells, only for a second, before it changes to something sweeter." "You have tried it yourself, then?" she asked, curiously. "Why, of course," he confirmed. "I'll leave it to gray sheep to write about the things they've only ever read about in other written books. Be warned, though, those gray sheep won't err from action if they find a way to destroy the Targaryen dragons." That night, she lay awake in bed and stared at the vial on her nightstand. The potion inside caught the moonlight, turning the inky liquid silver. She found herself thinking of Jon and Arya, whether they were together again yet. Could I swallow that potion and find out? She wondered to herself, but there was a war coming. A time when someone might need a little foresight might just be able to unhinge the balance of the universe. When she awoke in the morning after a dreamless sleep, her handmaiden passed her the letter that had arrived in the night. The sight of Jon's personal seal made her smile as she snapped the wax in half. She read it once, then twice, and she needed no stinking blue elixir to tell her what to do next. "Master Marwin," she greeted him cheerily, "if it pleases you, could you inform the men who fought for House Bolton that if they fight for House Stark now, I will grant them all a free and full pardon upon their return. Later, I will need you again. I must write to my cousin, the Lord of the Vale." With that concluded, she sought out Lord Wyman Manderley, who was preparing to return to White Harbor. He was too large to sit a horse these days, so there was a reinforced litter waiting for him in the courtyard of Winterfell. "My lord," she called out before his men could get him inside. Once in, it would take forever to get him out again. He could not bow, but he bent his knees in a form of deference. "My lady." Sansa didn't waste time on niceties. She had an army to cobble together in a matter of days. "When you came to swear me fealty, you lamented that you had no chance to exact revenge against the Boltons for the murder of your son." She reminded him, "The Boltons are gone, but the Freys are still out there." She handed him Jon's letter and watched as a smile spread across his broad face. "What do you say to that, my lord?" He didn't have to say anything. His tears of grief turned to tears of hope. Next, she had to arrange passage with Lord Reed, who had only arrived at Winterfell the day before, but when she spoke to him, it was as if he had already guessed what would happen. Later that day, she returned to her chambers and opened her closet door. She found what she was looking for immediately. It was meant as a gift for Prince Rhaegar, but she had set it aside when she learned he was traveling incognito. Rosier had begun shaking the foundations of House Frey. Now it was down to them to bring the whole edifice crashing back down again. Another week of drifting down the neck, and they made it safely to the Riverlands. Jon and Rhaegar were the first on dry land, breathing the open air gratefully. This close to the neck, however, there was no sign of enemy forces. Emboldened by the fact, Jon dared crest a steep hill for a better look around from a high vantage point. What was once green and fertile fields was now a burned wasteland. In the near distance, a small village had been looted, and he could just make out a gibbet inhabited by a blackened corpse, swinging in the breeze. Any living souls had long since fled that place. To him, it looked like a greener and wetter version of the wildling camps he had encountered north of the Wall. Certainly not the most productive and fertile regions of the whole realm. He thought again about what Rhaegar said the week before. Take the realm. "My lord, a message from Winterfell," a man's voice called from behind him. Jon spun on his heels, turning his back on the Riverlands. He ran back down the hill to where the messenger sat atop a sturdy Garran horse. His clothes were stained from the road and soaked from his journey down the neck. When Jon reached him, he could see the man had ridden non-stop. "From Lady Stark, my lord," the man said. There was another package under his arm, but he passed that to Rhaegar. Jon glanced over Sansa's letter and smiled to himself. Reinforcements would be arriving forthwith, it said. Bolton men in need of a pardon and a few hundred Manderleys looking for revenge against the Freys. It was by no means an army, but it was enough to kick the Freys out of River Run and Seagard. He had taken back Winterfell with less. "Good news from Winterfell," he said to Rhaegar. But the prince was busy with something else. His package, wrapped in colored paper, lay open on the packed earth ground, its contents spread out flat, a battle standard the size of a bedsheet. black silk with a silk scarlet, three-headed dragon sewn expertly in the middle. They both regarded it with a growing sense of an ever-shifting destiny. The farther they traveled through the Riverlands, the more the ravages of war revealed themselves. Once fertile fields had been put to the torch, reducing them to little more than scorched earth. He wouldn't have been surprised if the raiders hadn't sown salt into the ground just for good measure. Whole villages had been laid to waste, leaving only stumps of houses that had been stripped to the foundations. Wattle and daub homes of the small folk had been torn away completely. Many were populated only by rotting corpses hanging from gibbets, suspended from the town walls that were meant to protect them. A stray dog followed them through one such place, yapping incessantly at their passing horses. Jon noted that dog was the first sign of life they had seen since leaving the Neck. Regardless of who governed the Riverlands now, it would take years for the land to recover, and there wasn't so much as a grain of corn to see any survivors through the oncoming winter. If the maesters told it true, and this winter would be the longest ever, the region was doomed. "Who did this?" he asked Brennan, Tully as they passed the remains of another derelict village. "The Freys." Not even the Freys would do this to their own people. It was a begrudging concession that made his real guess all the more ominous. Lannisters. Of course, he thought to himself, the Lannisters' food supply would be coming from the Reach, so why did they need the Riverlands? Although that didn't make sense because Cersei had the Tyrells murdered in the Sept of Baelor. That had to be the most stunning act of self-sabotage Jon had ever heard of. When he mentioned this to Brendan, the old man laughed mirthlessly. "Cersei's mad. Do you think the mad see reason?" Jon stifled a sigh and kept his gaze on the road ahead. What few scouts they had already ridden ahead, forewarning them of whatever fresh hell awaited them in the next village. Seagard was coming into view now, a good-sized town spread out along the northern lip of Iron Man's Bay. The woods that surrounded it were only sparse. The remains of once great forests fell to fuel the shipping industry. Jon could only be grateful for that, as it afforded him a clear view of the town they hoped to take as soon as Sansa's reinforcements arrived. Now that he had seen the destruction for himself, he soon found himself wondering whether they could even wait that long. "Do you know the castle?" he asked. "As well as any outsider," replied Brendan. "What are you thinking?" "Well, I suspect I'm thinking the same thing you are, my lord," Jon replied. "That we get in there somehow and free the Mallisters. A small hope, I'll grant you. But if we have someone who knows the castle, it could be possible." The older man didn't try to hide his skepticism. "If it were that easy, my lord, I'd have nipped in and done it myself on the way up to Winterfell. Even with that wench Lady Sansa sent down, it would be a tough call. And the Freys may be stupid, but they're not unprepared." Dismayed, Jon suppressed a sigh and continued gazing out over the town. It, at least, looked like it was still functioning. Penetrating the castle continued to be his only idea for springing the rightful lord out of his cell, and it persisted in his brain like a stubborn stain. "I still want to see for myself," he said. "Are you mad?" Brendan demanded. Jon only laughed. "Not in person, my lord. I need Ghost." He looked around, locating his dire wolf at the edge of the sparse woods, where he was sniffing at the undergrowth. "Ghost! To me?" The wolf hesitated, but finally obeyed. Jon began to wonder at what was in those woods that so fascinated his wolf. Easy prey? Other wolves? The only other traveler they had met talked of a vast pack of wolves, led by a she-wolf the size of a royal wheelhouse. The ragged man had grown skittish at the sight of Ghost, until Jon called the wolf to heel and settled the man's nerves. It made him wonder something he dared not give voice to, but he was sure Sansa once told him Nymeria was let loose in the Riverlands. That night, they camped close enough to the coast to hear the sea. When Jon closed his eyes, he opened them again, when he close enough to smell the salt and hear the waves crashing against the basalt cliffs. He was in a place where the trees thinned out, and looking down a steep incline, leading into the town. The air was heavy with pine, salt, and men. It was the men who made him nervous, as he ran down the incline. The town was in darkness, and he slipped unseen through the shadows of the walls. Only when he passed the strips of light from beacons and candles and windows did he show himself, but it was enough to make him skittish. He passed down dank alleyways, where the air stank of open latrines and rotting food that had been tossed from windows overhead. Beneath his paws, the cobbles were slick with an unknown slime, while high overhead, the winged beast circled beyond even his sharpened eyesight. Still, he felt safe in the knowledge that if he was attacked, the beast would swoop down from the skies in the blink of an eye. The cold stone castle rose from the edge of the land, and the sound of men were closer than ever. More than he'd encountered before, he could hear their voices as they walked the walls. Little of consequence from what he could decipher, until... "A dragon," they said. "Hey, and I saw a merman out in Iron Man's Bay yesterday morning." "And what about those wolves?" "You can't deny them wolves." "Hundreds," they say, led by the biggest she-wolf in Westeros. "They attacked the camp outside River Run, so don't tell me they can't come prowling around here. There's truth in what the small folk say, no doubt about it." "Since when have you known wolves to come sniffing around Seagard?" He prowled silently around the perimeter of the walls, trying to get the men in his line of sight, but all he could hear were their voices, disembodied but still close at hand. "The wolves are bold. It was Robb Stark who brought them down from the north. Whole armies of them. Everyone knows them. Northern wolves are demons sent from the seven hells." The other man laughed out loud. The sound of it startled him, causing him to flinch away. He exerted his will through sheer force of effort, otherwise he would have bolted. You worry about the wolves all you like," he replied. "I'm more concerned about Black Walder's coming home from the old man's funeral. No more than a day or two away, my scouts tell me. Now he's Lord of the Crossing, he'll have no more use for this place. What'll he do with the prisoners? He can put them to the sword for all I care. If I heard it true, that's exactly what he will do." He'd heard enough. Jon let go of his hold on Ghost, pulling himself back into his own conscious body with a force of will that left him breathless. Suddenly, Rosier was standing over him, bearing a bowl of something hot and steaming. He knelt, almost spilling the broth over his clean tunic, with a look of concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" he asked. "You look terrible." Nonplussed, Jon scrambled to sit up. "Thanks. You look wonderful yourself." "Sorry, what I meant was... You were doing that wolf warging thing again, weren't you?" he asked. "It must take a lot of out of you. So I prepared this for you." Proudly, Rhaegar proffered up the bowl of broth, and Jon accepted it gratefully. Warging really wasn't like that, but it was difficult to someone who didn't have the ability to do it. At first, it was confusing and easily passed off as a strange dream. Now, years later, it was almost second nature. The prince had lit a small oil lamp and positioned it between them on the floor of their shared tent. Uplit, with the yellow glow in his face, his eyes looked bright purple. It was almost disconcerting. "Well, was it worth it?" he asked, expectantly. Jon allowed himself a smile. "I heard a lot. I know now is that we don't have time to wait for reinforcements. Get the others so we can talk properly." While Rhaegar went to round up the others, he found some hard bread to go with his broth, and ate quickly. So quick he barely tasted it, and still didn't have time to finish before the others returned. Then he had to recount what he had heard, and even now he struggled to discern his own feelings from those of Ghost. But he still was able to cover the basics, including the tidbit he overheard about Edwin Frey's death and Black Walder's absence from Seagard. 2 days' ride away, he remembered. "The fact is," Jon concluded, "we can't take the castle, even with the dragon. But if Black Walder's returning from the twins any day now, we can take him." Brynden was quiet for a moment, seemingly lost in thought. Eventually, he went further than Jon. "If Edwin is dead, and Black Walder really is the new Lord of the Crossing, if we get him alive, we'll have control of the twins. He'll yield quick enough, with a dragon breathing down his neck." "So long as we take him alive," Jon emphasized. Although the dragon and the wolf could still help, he was certain of that, if nothing else. Silence settled once more over Winterfell. Snow blanketed the yards and courtyards in an unbroken virgin whiteness as far as Sansa could see. It capped the walls and turrets and trickled silently down the icicles hanging like molten wax from the gargoyles and overhanging guttering. Horses whickered in their stables and a lone dog barked at the moon. Little else stirred on such a harsh night. If winter brought with it only snow, it would be beautiful, but she knew better. She had seen them herself. Watching from the warmth of the great hall, Sansa looked out over the scene without really seeing any of it. Needlework lay across her lap, momentarily forgotten. All around her silk direwolves snarled at three-headed dragons from fields of black and silver-gray linen. Her new bevy of women had been helping her assemble to the multicolored silks of war. The previous night, she hadn't stopped sewing until she was too tired. She'd accidentally stitched a half a direwolf's jaw to her own skirts. In the weeks since sending reinforcements to the Riverlands, her thoughts had turned increasingly to war. She had knelt in the godswood until her knees were raw and spent whole nights lying awake, sleepless as she agonized over the merits of sending her men back out to war. No matter how many times she told herself that this wasn't like Robb's war, it felt the same. The end result was the same, untold numbers of dead Northerners. And as she was so tired, she was practically falling asleep on her feet. "Your father was a killer. Your brother is a killer." A voice from long ago awoke her as her eyes drifted shut. For a fraction of a second, she thought she saw his face. "You better get used to looking at killers." It had been so long since she thought of Sandor, and she wondered where he was now. Dead, more than likely. So many people feared him, even Arya in her own way. But Sansa never had. She saw the pain and fear in his eyes as he told her about the night his brother pushed his face into the fire. She made him a promise that she would tell no one, and she had been true to her word. Wide awake once more, she ventured out to the gallery beyond and asked that warm, spiced wine be brought to her. That stuff always made her drowsy. But when she returned to the hall, she saw that she was no longer alone. Master Marwin was there with her mother in tow. Her mother never slept anymore, but she rarely ventured beyond her chambers. Curious, she joined them at the trestle table beside the fire. "Pardon us, my lady," said the maester. "We saw the lights and assumed it was you. If something ails you, you know I can help." Sansa hesitated before answering. "Can you help my armies win a war?" He looked apologetic. Alas, some things are down to luck and sensible commanders. Both are rather rare these days. Sansa pulled at a loose thread in the sleeve of her gown, nervous and tense. "But it's different now. Jon and I have no desire to rule the Riverlands, but to restore them to their rightful rulers. That makes all the difference, right?" "You're looking for approval," Marwin replied. "You want someone to tell you you're doing the right thing. And, moreover, you're looking for someone to tell you the outcome. But it's impossible. You can only do what you see fit and hope for the best." It was hardly reassuring, yet comfortingly true. She never could abide liars. There's more to it than that. There's a war coming in the north, and it matters not a jot who sits the Iron Throne. If Jon gets caught up in a protracted southern war, what's to stop the others moving south? Marwin raised a pained smile. "The wall." He paused, letting that detail sink in before adding, "Your cousin knows this, and he won't let that happen. He knows better than any of us what's headed this way. If he liberates the Riverlands, he could raise an army of grateful lords. Lords who have men by the thousand to travel beyond the wall. Right now, as things stand, you haven't the men to take them on." The loose thread in her sleeve had snapped, so she took to digging her fingernail into a crack in the weirwood table. She worked away at the groove in the wood grain, channeling her nervous energy into it. "Why now?" she asked, dropping her voice to a whisper. "Why have the others returned now, after all this time?" Marwin's answer was equally low. "True. They hadn't been seen. That doesn't mean they'd gone away." "So, they were there all along," she replied, frowning. "Ever since the last Dawn Age, they've been roaming the lands of always winter and just biding their time. Even so, it still means that something is drawing them south. That's why I'm really here," he answered. "To try and find out. To see if there's a way of reaching a settlement with them. My lady, they live here. They're as much a part of this world as us, and dogs and wolves. So let us see if we cannot reason with them. While your cousin must raise his army and prepare for the worst, let us also hope for the best and find a way to make that army redundant." Sansa shifted uncomfortably, but if he wanted to talk to the Great Other over tea and lemon cakes, she wasn't about to stop him. She would bake them herself if she thought it would bring peace to her people. The scouts caught sight of the Frey company not 3 miles from Seagard. 20 men in the guard around Blackwalder's wheelhouse, and an unknown number of scouts riding ahead. It was then that Jon realized their small number might be an advantage. They just looked like weary travelers passing through the Riverlands, headed for the safety of the Westerlands. A far from unusual sight, only Brendan had to be kept hidden. Jon, Rhaegar, and Davos were free to hunch down and walk the road in single file with their packs strapped to their backs. If anyone stopped them, Jon was the son of Davos, and Rhaegar was their humble companion. They heard the horses of the household guard before they saw them, the tramping of steel shod hoofs pounding on the packed earth road that led to the town gates. Having donned rough-spun cloaks over their clothes, Their weapons were concealed. Jon carried Longclaw with an extra dagger thrust into his sword belt for good measure. As well as his own sword, Sir Davos found an axe fit for planting in skulls if need be. Sir Brynden, following them from behind a roadside verge, was ready to spring out and lead the attack, as soon as Jon called the signal. Only Rhaegar was lightly armed with a simple castle-forged sword. His greatest weapon was coiled around the tree stumps, just out of sight of the road. As they drew level, the three men walking the road fell to the pathway at the side, ostensibly to allow the wheelhouse to pass. Only at the last minute did Jon jump out into the road, shrugging off his pack as he went, unsheathing Longclaw and causing the guardsmen's horses to rear. The one out front was thrown off altogether, and he cursed heavily as he hit the ground. He called out to Brynden. At the same time, Rhaegar bellowed some Valyrian command that brought Sonar crashing through the trees as he tried to build enough momentum to take flight. In the ensuing chaos, Jon managed to dispatch the fallen guardsman with a quick, downward thrust. One of his fellows dashed over to help, only to be picked off with an axe to the skull. Sonar beat his wings, screeching loud enough to wake the dead. At some point, when Jon wasn't even looking, the door to the wheelhouse was flung open and a weasel-faced man demanded to know what was going on. He took one look at the dragon before flinging himself back inside and slamming the door shut. Ghost had joined the fight by tearing the throat out of one of the horses, its blood gushing from the open wound and drenching the wolf's pure white fur in slick red slime. Seizing the initiative, Jon grabbed the dead horse's fallen rider and pressed his dagger to the man's throat. "If you value your lives, drop your weapons now," he yelled over the racket. To make his point, he drove the edge of the dagger deeper into the man's exposed throat, right beneath the loosened gorget of his helm. Sonar circled overhead, swooping down and screeching as the guards attempted to advance on them. Jon leapt back from the swing of a sword, but it caught his prisoner in the belly and he could only watch as the man's entrails slid from a gaping wound. They slopped to the ground with a nauseating wet slap. Dropping the useless hunk of meat the man now was, Jon took another man out with Longclaw and Rhaegar gave the command for Sonar to open fire. "Dracarys!" "Shit," Jon cursed. "We need Black Walder alive. Don't let that creature burn everything." The dragon's flame missed the wheelhouse and set a guardsman and his horse alight before the others dropped their weapons at the sight of the jet of flame. It was as if they hadn't yet realized that Sonar was a real dragon. Stunned, they all watched in horror before fleeing on foot. Ghost gave chase, and they fled into the arms of Brynden Tully, who was waiting farther down the road with his sword drawn and ready. The old man had waited a long time for this moment, and he set about it with relish. Without wasting time, Jon wrenched open the wheelhouse door, fully prepared for Black Walder's attack. He had donned armor, but without a squire, he hadn't had enough time to strap it on properly, and the breastplate hung uselessly from his left shoulder. It was more a hindrance than a help, but his sword was drawn and he leapt out, fighting, thrusting the blade at Jon's breast. It could have reached his heart had Jon not parried so easily. The other man was still in deep shock, and Jon was quick to seize the advantage. He slashed with Longclaw while kicking out to trip his assailant. "Who are you?" Black Walder demanded, retreating fast. "What do you want?" "Gold." "I can give you gold. I am the Lord of the Crossing. Name your price, and you shall have it, sir." Rosier jumped in behind Frey and now had his sword trained on the Lord's back. Wolf, dragon, and man had finished off the rest of the household guard, and Black Walder knew he was surrounded. Jon touched Longclaw's tip, just enough to draw blood and set the blade alight. Black Walder watched the flames take light, the blade turning red in horrified fascination. "On your knees and drop your weapons," Jon commanded, flaming sword to the man's throat. "Hands behind your back. You're coming with us." Surrounded and with one terrified eye on the circling dragon, Black Walder knelt. He hit the packed earth road, and the jolt caused the breastplate to finally fall from his chest. Meanwhile, Sir Brynden had come up behind him, stopping only to wipe the blood from his sword. "I'll name my price, my lord," he growled in the kneeling man's ear. "I'll have back all you stole from us, and more besides." Jon watched as the color drained from Black Walder's face. "You cunt," he spat. "You complete cunt." Brynden laughed. "And you'd know a cunt when you see one." "End this," Rosier commanded, returning to the small fold with Sir Davos. "End it now and tie the bastard's hands together. The sooner we get to Seagard, the better." "Wait," Sir Brynden called out as they turned to the task. "Wait right there." Both Jon and Rhaegar stopped and turned to see what the old man was planning. "Secure those horses by all means. We'll be needing them later," he said. "But I say we take my lord of the crossing for a little walk, don't you?" Normally Jon would have protested. Memories of being paraded through the Wilding camp were raw in his mind. The humiliation of it, the vulnerability to attack, that was only spared him because of Yrgrat's fearsome nature. But then he had never organized a massacre before, less still a massacre that resulted in the fall of his house. Any qualms were set aside as he remembered hearing about how Grey Wind's head was sewn to Robb's corpse and paraded through the Riverlands in a grotesque triumphalist procession. "Very well," he replied. "We could all do with the fresh air." Sonar had eaten one of the corpses already and was making a start on a dead horse, but Rhaegar went to him and stroked the scales on his flank. He whispered soft Valyrian to the beast and kissed his smoking snout. After that, the dragon took wing and soared into the sky. They were only a mile or two from the town of Seagard. An hour or so, and they were there. "Do you know how many men I have in that town?" Walder demanded. "Do you think the four of you can take on an army of thousands? Do you really?" "No," answered Jon nonchalantly. "Do you think they could reach you in time before we cut your throat to the bone the same way you cut Lady Stark's?" He smiled brightly at Lord Walder and added, "More importantly, are they flame-proof?" Still bound and being forced along the road at sword point, Black Walder suddenly sagged and laughed entirely without mirth. "You're a fucking Stark, aren't you?" "Forgive me," I heard Ramsay Bolton did for the older girl and the younger boy, and Theon Greyjoy did for the cripple. Which can only mean, he trailed off as he tried to guess at Jon's identity. "Which can only mean you're the bastard. That must be it. You're Ned Stark's bastard. I don't know why you're so grieved for the throat of Catelyn Stark, bastard. Because she fucking hated you, you know. She would have taken great pleasure in opening your throat just as I did hers." Guessing what was going to happen next, Jon sidestepped away from the prisoner so Sir Brynden could get a clear aim. He kicked out from behind, knocking the legs from under Black Walder and sending him sprawling into the muck. "Up," Sir Brynden yelled. "So get up now." Jon had reached his limit and called Sir Brynden off. "My lord, he is our prisoner and he is disarmed." Jon stooped to help Black Walder back to his feet and then used the rough-spun tunic he'd used as a disguise to wipe the dirt and blood from his face. None too carefully, but he did it all the same. Meanwhile, Brynden remembered his knight's code and reddened before backing away. But he offered no apologies, and Jon certainly wasn't about to start demanding one. When they reached the gates of Seagard's town, more guards appeared. They readied their crossbows, training them on the approaching party before realizing what they were seeing and freezing in indecision. They couldn't fire at their lord's captors without hitting him. "Command them to stand down," said Jon, "and inform them they are free to leave in peace. No one will harm and no dragon either. Resist, and there will be another attack with fire. Do this, and you might just come out of this with your life intact," Rodier added. Black Walder had little choice, but he hesitated a long time before wringing the words from his breath. "Sire, stand down and depart," he said, choking on every syllable. "I am yielding the town." The men patrolling the walls and manning the gates looked to each other and then the four men holding their lord prisoner. "But my lord, we can take them cunts for our supper if you wanted," said one, utterly perplexed. A huge winged shadow swept across them, followed by a piercing shriek from the skies and a jet of vivid flame. Rogier smiled up at the guards, beatifically. "Are you sure about that?" They dropped their pikes and opened the gates in stiff and awkward movements. Meanwhile, the townsfolk saw the dragon and their screams filled the air as they ran for cover. But Jon knew Rhaegar would call him off and tried to call out to them to not be afraid. Before they entered the town, Rhaegar did as he thought he would, and Sonar made for cloud cover once more. Having figured out who Jon was, Black Walder now turned his attention to Rhaegar. "So, who's this one?" he asked. "Silver hair, purple eyes, and humble pet, dragon in tow." "Well, that rules out House fucking Bracken, doesn't it?" "Viserys is my guess. He's the one that got away. Him and that sister of his. You know, we had a brother named after one of your lot, Aegon Frey. Turned out to be a lackwit, so my grandfather dressed him in motley and made him a capering fool. Personally, I think it quite apt for a fucking Targaryen namesake." Rogier merely sighed. His verbal reply was cut off as a heap of shit sailed through the air in a perfect arc, hitting Lord Walder square in the face. "Here he comes, the up-jumped weasel!" A fine young maid of the town called across the town square. "Look at him now, the Frey murderer." With the dragon now out of sight, the people grew bold. When they saw their tormentor bound and being marched through the streets at sword point, they grew positively jubilant. Chaos reigned, but chaos of a different order than before. Soon rotten vegetables and night soil was being flung from all quarters and dumped from upper-story windows from the tightly packed houses. In an effort to avoid the filth, Jon steered his group into the middle of the square, hoping to be out of range of the human shit at the very least. Rosier ducked a flying turnip with surprising grace and fell into step with them. "We need to move quickly before we're all killed." "They're aiming at him," Jon replied, nodding to Walder. "It's nothing personal." "I know that," Rhaegar retorted. "But I'd rather we weren't so prominently in the line of fire." They picked up their pace before the crowds of people could close in on them. Jon tried to force them back to clear the path to the castle, but there were too many. Women clawed at Fro's face, scratching red livid marks down his cheeks from eyes to jawline. He looked like he was weeping blood. Finally, Jon Davos and Rhaegar formed a human shield all the way to the castle gates. "Now yield," Jon yelled above the din. "Yield the castle to Ser Patrek Mallister, and I swear I will plead with him to spare your life." Having run the gauntlet of hate, what was left of Frey's anger and pride had taken a severe battering. He fell to his knees before the gates of the castle, watching in despair as the portcullis was raised. To Jon, it all seemed to happen in agonizing slow motion. Inch by painful inch, he watched the gate rising. "Lay down your arms. I yield the castle," Frey called out. "I yield the castle to my Lord Mallister." "Very good," Jon whispered in his ear. But he kept a watchful eye on what the men in the Barbican were doing. There was an air of shock and disbelief in the castle as they slowly filed into the yard below. When most were assembled, Jon and the others marched their prisoner within the walls. He gripped Frey's shoulders, holding him up, and hissed in his ear. "Now tell them again, tell them you yield and you want the Mallisters out here, unharmed." They were surrounded by stunned and silent faces, mostly men at arms, barely able to comprehend this fresh trauma breaking out all around them. "I yield," Frey said again, sagging in his captor's hands. "The castle is yielded to my Lord Patrek Mallister. Release him from the dungeons and bring him and his family to the yard." It seemed to take forever, and a day. In reality, it was no more than a half hour. Shaken and pale from their ordeal, the Mallisters slowly appeared on a balcony overlooking the courtyard of their newly restored castle. Their eyes were glazed, their faces slack with shock and uncertainty. Only slowly did the realization sink in, and that didn't even begin until they saw a man they recognized. "Claim the castle, my lord. It is yours again." It took all of Jon, Davos, and Rhaegar's powers of persuasion combined to stop Mallister loyalists from lynching Black Walder from the top of Seagard's tallest tower. The chaos of the liberation, followed by the outpouring of anger and the need for revenge, threatened to overrule even the most logical minds. The three of them together had spelled out their plan over and over, until Jon knew every nuance of the speech off by heart. Kill Walder after winning just one battle, and they would lose the war again. Keep him alive, and they could take the whole of the Riverlands back, and then some. Even after the Coolheads had won out, Jon still felt uneasy about Lord Frey being left in the dungeons with just the Mallisters watching over him. It would only take one guard to look the other way while another stuck a knife in their captive's heart. As such, he sent 2 of Bryndon's men down there, and Ser Davos volunteered himself. Meanwhile, Jon and Rhaegar were left with valuable time to breathe until the newly restored Lord of Seagard was well enough to receive them. If Mallister joined their forces to his own and Sansa's reinforcements arrived soon, they would have the beginnings of a fine army, but only if Lord Mallister could be convinced to join them, and Jon knew better than to rely on gratitude for that outcome. Mallister may think twice before backing another Northern Lord, especially one only known to him as the bastard Get of Eddard Stark. He may think twice before committing lives to another lost cause. However, it was a chance they would have to take. The day after the liberation, he and Rhaegar walked the battlements together. It was a crisp and clear day, and the view of the Iron Islands was second to none. But it was the great foam-capped, crashing waves that so captivated Jon. Having lived all his life in the landlocked north of the open sea was a rare sight, and a welcome one. "You don't think there'll be trouble from them now, do you?" asked Rhaegar, looking across the sea toward the islands. "I asked one of the tower guards here, and he said he's seen great fleets of ships sailing out over the last few turns of the moon." "There's always trouble from them," Jon replied flatly. "I'd be more worried if there wasn't trouble from the Ironborn. And if I have the good fortune to see Theon Greyjoy among them, I'll have his head myself. There'll be no coming back from that. Harder or stronger. Cunt. Rosier's eyes widened against his son's vulgarity. Is he the one who first took Winterfell from Robb, and then Ramsay took it from him? Jon nodded. Aye, Ramsay took Winterfell, and most of Theon, if what Sansa says is true. Do you doubt her? Sansa has a soft heart and a gentle soul, father, he explained. I think she forgets that Theon was the one who started all this. He fixed his gaze on the distant islands, lip curled in disdain as he picked each one out. Each misshapen lump of land that passed for an island looked dark, damp, and dank in a haze of thick sea mist. Meanwhile, Rugga kept looking at him incredulously. It pains me to bring it up again, but Sansa spent months being routinely raped and beaten. Enough! Jon cut over him, suddenly angry. Forgive me, said Rhaegar, instantly backing down. I only mention because firstly, I don't think you realize how strong Sansa really is. She's not made of glass. And secondly, I think you should remember who got her out of there. Your old tormentor? Jon couldn't deny the truth of it. Brave enough to kill Ramsay Bolton's whore and steal off into the night with his wife, but not brave enough to bring Sansa to me directly. Rogier sighed. A guilty conscience isn't the same thing as cowardice, Jon. Anyway, Greyjoy didn't leave Sansa's side until Brienne of Tarth swore her sword to the Starks. After making a full circuit of the battlements, they decided to take a look at the market stalls. It had been less than a day since Black Walder had been frog-marched through these streets, and already the small town square was thriving. Jon remembered that it had taken weeks for the North to get their confidence back after the fall of House Bolton, but the spectacle they had provided seemed to work wonders. Jon paused by a stall selling fresh codfish the size of a small horse that he'd seen being hauled up straight from the nearby port. It was now hanging from a hook in its gullet from the stall's crossbeam. Fresh sea fish was rare where he came from. It was always smoked and salted to preserve it on its long journey north. I'll take 3 of those codfish, if I may, he said to the brawny armed woman tending the catch. How much? He had dragons of the gold variety in a purse tied to his belt, but the woman waved it away. To the men who freed us from them, freeze, it's free, she said. And here's a little something for that dragon of yours, too. Tell our lord that Seagard will always be Mallister. He thanked her appreciatively, and accepted the offering of a side of pork for the dragon. By the smell of it, it was nowhere near as fresh as the fish. But it was nothing a good roasting from Sonar wouldn't cure. All the same, before they departed for the kitchens, Jon slipped 2 gold dragons into a discreet corner of the stall, where only she would find it. As they made their way back, they chatted easily about nothing important, until they reached their destination, and Jon told Rhaegar to wait outside. He left the fish with the cooks, and by the time he returned to his father, he was chatting with a young serving girl. She was of middling height, with honey-colored hair and lively blue eyes. Her Frey livery now looked somewhat out of place, but she had ducked away again by the time Jon returned. Who was that? He asked. Have you suddenly found yourself otherwise engaged for this evening? Rhaegar looked scandalized. What? No. Of course not. She was employed by Black Walder just a few days back, and now has no idea of what to do. Poor thing. Anyway, I told her to report to the stewards just on the off chance. They may take pity on her. Jon couldn't help but tease him anyway, ribbing him all the way back to the Great Hall, where they were awaiting word on Lord Mallister's progress. After that, they would all dine privately in the Lord Solar, deciding where they went from here. Sansa broke the seal on the letter with a sharp snap and read quickly. Her nerves were so bad, her hands were shaking, and at first, the meaning of the words didn't seem to sink in. After a second read, she paced the dais and grinned like a lackwit. They've done it, she cried out to Marwin. They've taken Seagard. They suffered no losses, and they have Black Walder under their own guard. This is it, Master Marwin. They have control of the Riverlands in all but name. I must say that was well done, Marwin agreed once she read out the whole letter. Now he needs to march his army back north again. Sansa disagreed. The time for wolves had come again. They were cresting that wave already. Next would be the time for dragons, and they could not stop until they have taken the realm. It was an opinion she kept to herself, but she was now too worked up to sit still. As much as she loved having her home back, it was hard to sit there and do nothing while he was rallying forces to sweep the evils that had engulfed them since the death of King Robert. Only the sight of her mother pulled her up sharp. Catelyn was sat at the end of the long trestle table, her face expressionless but her eyes near closed, as her cheeks glistened with more than just semi-congealed blood. "Can you excuse us for a moment, please, master?" She wasn't really asking, and Marwin rose to leave without preamble. Once they were alone, she took the seat beside her mother and let the silence soothe them both. "Do you think this should have been Robb?" Again, a non-question. A self-answering question. "The bitter truth is, mother, that it could so easily have been Robb. He had the love of his people. He had the army. He had the military expertise. And he even had the money. The only thing he didn't have was the wit to play the game." Catelyn looked small now. No longer frightening or fearsome, just small and sad and more dead than alive. "It wasn't your fault," she continued, touching her mother's clammy hand. "You begged him not to send Theon to Winterfell. You begged him to keep Lord Corstark a hostage. You didn't know he had married that woman until it was all too late. But now Jon's taking it all back, and you have to love him for that." Sansa didn't even know why this was important to her. She didn't know why she needed her mother to love Jon now. Catelyn had lost her power, and her opinion changed little for her as it had for Robb. Then it came to her in a flash. She was only searching for some trace of humanity still residing deep in the heart of this stony corpse. The saddest part of all was that, even if the humanity was still in there, Lady Stoneheart had few ways of expressing it. Catelyn moved her hand and took a hold of Jon's letter before covering her throat with the other. "King," she said. Dropping the letter, she took hold of Sansa's hand and added, "Queen." If that was a blessing, Sansa was prepared to take it. There was a cold wind blowing from the north that evening. It could be heard in the rafters, shattering the peace of the night by pulling tiles from the roofs and smashing them into the cobbles below. It blasted the shutters over Sansa's bedroom windows wide open and brought squalling hailstones, pelting against the mullions. She had to reach out of the open windows and slam them shut again. As she did so, she saw Marwin in the yard below, holding his peculiar glass candle. The flame was still lit, and it did not so much as flicker. He told her he used it so, send and receive messages, but it was one more aspect of the world's awakening magic that she did not understand. She returned to her books, going over the household expenses that Ramsay had left to gather dust. Before him, Theon hadn't troubled himself much, and prior to him, Robb had been otherwise engaged. In reality, no one had been balancing Winterfell's books since her father's day, and these endless columns of figures had been her inheritance. She tried to concentrate, but the blank inky numbers blurred and swam before her eyes. Arya was the one with the head for mathematics, she remembered. As the men stood aside for her, she saw the visitors at the gates. For a moment, she could not decide what to do. People calling at this hour was never good news, but she would not allow the horrors of the past erode the hospitality of the North, especially not in weather like this. "Open the gates," she commanded. "Open them." They were on horseback, shrouded in cloaks and rough-spun covers. None of it was adequate to keep the hail and blustering winds off them. One of her men-at-arms came cantering over the cobbles toward her. "I do not like the look of this, my lady," he called out to her. "One insists he knows you, but I can tell he's lying." "Did he give a name?" she asked, reaching for a lantern. Marwin had gone, taking his glass candle with him. She had been left with a mere mortal light. Meanwhile, the man was hesitating. "No, my lady, please, do not go out there. They're dangerous. Brigands, outlaws, or wildlings. I cannot tell." All the same, she wanted to see for herself. There were more of them than she at first realized. But in the poor light she could not make them out, and their hoods were up, covering their faces. As she drew nearer the portcullis, she held up the lantern in an effort to get a look. The largest one, a man who looked as if he had been hewn from rock, dismounted his horse. He was soaked to the skin, huge and bulky. Even his companions seemed to want to keep their distance from him. "Who goes there?" she called out to him. He moved forward slowly, pressing his face between the latticework of the portcullis so they were almost at kissing distance. Then he lowered his hood slowly. She held up the lantern and shone the pale light on a face all scarred down one side, his smile causing the scar tissue to twist all the more. His smile never had been friendly. "Well, look here. The little bird has spread her wings and flapped up a storm big enough to blast this whole realm to the ground." She thought she would never see him again. She thought that he was dead. She was glad she was wrong. Sansa smiled into the storm, "And faithful dogs always find their way back to you, in the end," she replied. The solar was an intimate place, with a brazier burning in place of a hearth. Jon warmed his hands against the burning coals within, studying the tapestries that covered the walls. They showed storm-tossed ships in a perfect reflection of real-time weather conditions happening outside. "That storm's coming down from the north," Rosier observed as he joined his son at the brazier. "A good thing we're not on the roads this night." Jon agreed as another squall of rain hammered off the shuttered mullions. It had rattled and howled all through the evening and into the hours of darkness, closing in suddenly on what had been a fine day. But that was winter. The sun would be a rare thing now, soon blown away by the cold white winds from the north. It was only a matter of time before they were caught out by one on the open roads. Turning from the brazier to make room for his father, Jon returned to the table. Lord Mallister's servants had laid out wine, fresh-baked bread, and the codfish he purchased earlier that day had been fried up in oils and butter crusted in toasted breadcrumbs. The wine was good, too, served in a manner fitting for such a violent night, heated and generously spiced. They weren't left waiting for long before Jason Mallister joined them, his son Patrick in tow. Lord Jason was a lean man to begin with, but his year of captivity had left him gaunt and hollow-cheeked. His indigo cloak looked like it was drowning him. Although his hair had turned completely gray, his eyes remained a bright and piercing blue. The supper was informal, so the four men seated themselves around the one trestle table, set up in the middle of the solar, and served themselves for the time being. "Yesterday, I lacked the presence of mind to thank you for all that you have done for House Mallister, Lord Snow." Mallister began. Before Jon could wave it away, he pressed on. "My son and I wish to make it plain to you, whatever wars are to come, House Mallister will stand with you and fight beside you until this realm is set to rights." "Then I thank you also, my lord," replied Jon. "But this is not as before, when King Robb was campaigning. The war we fight comes from the north, from the winter." Patrick frowned, but his father looked more understanding. "I hope Sir Daenerys was exaggerating. I prayed he was mistaken, or playing some jest. But now you are about to tell me he speaks truly in the letters he sends." "I cannot speak for what Sir Daenerys puts in his letters, my lord, but I can tell you what I've seen on rangings beyond the wall," explained Jon. "The others have returned, and with them the armies of the dead. The Great Other grows stronger all the time. More and more free folk villages are falling. The more they kill, the bigger their hosts get, and they're marching on the wall." Patrick appeared to have lost his appetite. "But the wall itself, it will stop them. It will hold them off. That's what it's for." Jon turned to him and answered, "The wall will hold them, but it will not stop them. Even if the wall is to contain the threat, it needs men and equipment, and I'm sure Sarkdanis has told you all about that." Sir Jason colored in the face. Jon thought he could tell what was coming next. Undoubtedly, like all lords across all 7 kingdoms, he had been meaning to help the Watch. He had been meaning to send men and supplies, but never quite got around to it. Jon wasn't angry, but it was the same story they'd been hearing ever since the War of the Five Kings began. Everyone would love to be able to help such an ancient and noble brotherhood such as the Night's Watch. Just as soon as they've won this battle, settled that old score, and planted another crown on the head of another pretender. Where the Night's Watch was concerned, tomorrow never came. "So now you're going to march north again?" Patrick asked. Rosier took over now. "It's not as simple as that. We already have the North, and the Knights of the Vale have rallied to our cause through the intervention of Lady Sansa Stark and her cousin, Lord Robert Arryn. We're here to take back the Riverlands. If you agree to follow us, we will take the realm, and then the realm will turn north and fight the oncoming winter, as it should have been from the beginning." While Rosier talked, Lord Jason was studying him intently. Growing more intent, those piercing blue eyes now as sharp as knives. "My lord," he addressed Rhaegar, "they say you are Westeros, Targaryen already come from across the narrow sea. And I will grant you my many months of captivity may have addled my wits, but I never forget the face of a man who has beaten me in the tourneys. In my youth it happened so rarely, and you beat me at the tourney of Storm's End. You and Sarah Barristan sell me, if I recall rightly. You Prince Rhaegar." Jon suddenly became much more interested in his fish supper, while Patrick coughed and spluttered. "But that's impossible." "It's certainly a long story, my lord," Jon agreed, looking up from his food again. "But can I just say there are many powers afoot since the return of dragons and the rise of the others?" Rosier drained his wineglass, as if fortifying himself. "I'll start from the beginning, shall I?" "I would appreciate that greatly," Mallister replied. "But the beginning was Jon's assassination at the hands of his brothers in the Watch." something Mallister already knew about courtesy of Sir Dennis as well as his lingering coma and sudden return. Rosier, however, had been kept well under wraps. While all the explaining was going on, Jon finished his supper. No matter what else was happening in the realm, the cod was excellent, and by the time they were done, the wine was almost running out too, and they all needed a stiff drink. "So what is Lord Commander Snow's connection to you, my lord?" Mallister asked Racker. Rhaegar smiled and answered bluntly, "He's my son, my only living son." The revelation was met by silence. No one even moved. Jon could feel the color rising in his face as all eyes turned to him. "No matter what else is happening," he eventually said, "we must remain focused on the war that's coming. There will be time enough to work it all out later. If we tarry too long, there will be no time for anything. All else is a distraction." "I agree," said Rhaegar. Coming so close to getting them focused on the war in the north, Jon was beginning to feel frustrated that his own personal history was once more becoming an issue. "Well, that explained the late Lord Stark's reluctance to name your mother," Mallister concluded, quite magnanimously. "And I will be honest, your grace. I fought against you in the rebellion. I fought against you at the Trident. I did what I thought was right and followed my Lord Paramount. And it will not be held against you," Rosier cut in, drearily. "If it was held against you, I would not have helped take back your castle. What's done is done, and what's more, it was done a long time ago." "We cannot be any fairer than that," Jon agreed. "Now I say we drink to our new alliance and leave the past where it is." His suggestion was met with a murmur of approval, and a servant was summoned to bring more of the spiced wine. It was the girl from before, with the honey-colored hair and bright blue eyes. She came through the door with the wine on a silver tray, in a silver decanter. Rhaegar seemed happy to see her. Jon noted. "You got the job then?" he asked, looking up the girl. Suddenly her hands trembled, and she spilled the wine over the prince's lap. She began apologizing, reaching for a napkin to mop up the spillage. Jon laughed, trying to break the tension. "You're frightening the poor girl, father. Leave her be." He tried to help, but the girl choked and glared at him as if he had wronged her somehow. "Girl, I think we can serve ourselves from here," Lord Mallister said, not unkindly. "My lords, it's her first day." For a long moment the girl seemed rooted to the spot. Her gaze locked into Jon's with tears in her eyes. He tried to tell her it would be all right, that even the best servants made mistakes, and even he had once done her job for the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Badly. But she tore herself away and fled the room, breathing raggedly. "Is the girl sick?" Rhaegar wondered. "I think we should check." Jon's nerves twitched. There was something off about her. "I'll go." Without waiting for agreement, he got up and went through the same door as the girl and found himself in a passageway to the kitchens. A passageway used only by servants that connected to every room in the castle, enabling them to move freely without being seen by important guests. There was no sign of her. At first, he kept going, checking every alcove that led to another outer door, and he wondered whether she hadn't risked hiding in one of the castle's actual chambers. But the sound of stifled sobbing led him farther through the passageway until he found its source, only it wasn't her. The crying girl didn't look anything like her, but for the fact that their clothes were identical and the bow in her hair was the same. "Girl," he said, "look at me." She looked up, and Jon felt his mouth run dry. He thought he might be seeing things, like poor Lord Jason when he first saw Rhaegar back from the dead. "Arya," he yelped, as if he'd been bitten. They lay together in semi-darkness, listening to the storm raging outside and talking. Talking most of all, while Jon held on to Arya protectively, only breaking off to stoke the fire or refill their cups. Slowly, she told her story. From the day she escaped King's Landing, when their father was arrested, until she arrived at Seagard hell-bent on killing Black Walder Frey and everything in between. Throughout it all, Jon's emotions went into varying degrees of freefall. When he found out she had only just escaped the Red Wedding, he had to turn away from her before she could see the tears in his eyes. By the time she was done, he was left with one stupid but burning question. "Why didn't you sail the Eastwatch? The brothers would have looked after you and sent for me straight away. I was Lord Commander by then." But she hadn't known. How could she? All she had was a few pieces of silver and a battered iron coin embossed with the Braavosi giant. All she knew were the magic words, Vela Morghulis. "I asked the boatman," she replied, "but he said all there was to the north was ice and war. And when he said he was for Braavos, I remembered the coin." It was all I had. It was only natural that she would have wanted to find her mother first. Jon did not blame her for that. As soon as this brotherhood found her, it sounded as though the choice was taken out of her hands anyway. All the same, he sighed deeply and rolled onto his back, staring up at the canopy above the bed they now shared. "I still wish you had come straight to me," he lamented. "You needn't have gone through all that pain and trauma." "Don't you think I wanted to?" she retorted, near waspishly. "I thought of you all the time. I risked my life to get Needle back just because it reminded me of you." Jon choked on whatever reply he had, apologizing instead. "And I ached for you too, little sister." He reached over and mussed up her hair, the way he always did when they were growing up in Winterfell together. It made her laugh, allowing him to catch a brief glimpse of the Arya he had always known and loved. But there was still a brittleness to her, a hardness that had never existed in her before. Behind her once guileless gray eyes lay an unspoken trauma, the fragility behind that prickling exterior. She lay on her side, limned in moonlight that slanted through the beams of the shutters, making her look paler than she already was. "Before we left Winterfell, you said, 'Different roads lead to the same castle.' Turns out you were right." Jon laughed, recalling that almost flippant missive. He had said it to make them both feel better, to comfort them both, that their goodbye was not final. He'd had no idea of just how truthful it would turn out to be. "Well, here we both are," he answered. "At the end of our different roads and in the same castle. Neither the roads nor the castle are the ones I expected." Another silence fell between them, filled only by the storm still howling around the curtain walls beyond. The rain pattering against the mullions lulled him into a semi-doze before the loud crash of a tree falling jolted him upright. The sound startled Arya too, but she quickly settled again after Jon put his arm around her, pulling her in tight. She was still small, he noted, and lean, but still taller and more filled out than he had last seen her. Stronger, too. It was muscle he could feel beneath the sleeves of the linen shift she wore now. "Sometimes, especially when I was with the Brotherhood without banners, I thought everyone would hate me for the things I've done," she admitted, "because I killed people. Then I was taken in by the faceless men, and I killed people for gold." "You had to survive, Arya," he interjected. "And we're your family. We could never hate you, ever." "Father would," she insisted. "He would never have killed a person for gold." Father never had to survive alone in the world with just a sword for company and a price on his head. Jon cut in again. "And you were a child. You still are a child. The only people at fault are the ones who put you in this position in the first place." Although Jon had recoiled when he saw what the faceless man had taught her to do, she changed her face the same way he changed his small clothes, and it set off his internal warning bells. What if she wasn't the real Arya? What if she was just some waif and stray wearing Arya's face as she wore that servant girl's face? The only thing that convinced him was that she knew things about him and Arya that no one could get from simply wearing some poor dead girl's death mask. "You would have hated what I became," she stated again. "But that wasn't me. I only remembered who I really was after I became no one." "You're Arya Stark of Winterfell," he said. "I know that now," she replied. "But I don't think you understand." Jon had to concede that he didn't. Perhaps he never would. There were some experiences you had to live before you could understand, and the closest he came was going undercover with the Free Folk. Even then, he had Ygritte and the others who chose to follow him after the battle. Tormund, Val, and even Mance in the end. They had learned to trust each other, while Arya had learned to trust no one. "Don't take any more revenge," he said. "Go home to Winterfell, where Sansa is waiting for you. She hated me even before all this." "She never hated you," Jon retorted. "She just didn't understand, and now she wants to make it up to you. She did with me." Arya frowned, her brow darkening so he couldn't see her eyes anymore. "The last I heard of her, she had murdered Joffrey and fled King's Landing in the form of a bat. I'm guessing only one of those things is likely to be true." "Neither is true, I don't think," he assured her. "Although, she was there when Joffrey died, and I don't think she was in any rush to help him." Rosier laughed again. "She was so in love with him. She won't thank you for reminding her of that," he stated. "Then I'll be sure to remind her every day." Her eyes twinkled moonlight, a little more of the old Arya shining through. Despite that, Jon's heart sank a little as he thought of the changes he had not yet told her about. He wanted to hear her story before burdening her with his own. It was true she had heard him call Rhaegar father, but he had palmed her off with some nonsense about the prince being his Night's Watch father. She hadn't believed him, he could tell. But it was enough to buy time before framing exactly what he was going to tell her. Joffrey was an angel compared to her husband, he said. Not Tyrion, that union was never consummated, so it was never valid. Jon drew a deep breath before answering, marshalling his own feelings that were prone to rage when he thought too much about it. Petyr Baelish sold her to Rose Bolton, who promptly forced her to marry his son, Ramsay, he explained, at length. Arya drew a sharp breath. He murdered our family and stole our home. How could she have been forced? Jon had given it a lot of thought over the months. Perhaps Baelish had a greater plan, and Jon was inclined to think he did, given his feelings for Sansa. But from what he knew, he filled in the blanks. Baelish sold her to the Boltons and then tried to rally the Knights of the Vale to her cause by telling them she'd been kidnapped and forced to marry Ramsay, he continued. I think his idea was that the Knights of the Vale would come rushing to Sansa's rescue, and she'd be so pathetically grateful that she would throw herself into Baelish's arms and marry him. This is no story, Jon pointed out. For what it's worth, Baelish succeeded and the Knights of the Vale joined our cause. But by that time, Ramsay Bolton had raped and beaten Sansa so severely she had fled at the first chance. Arya pulled away from him sharply, doubled over as if she'd been gripped by a sudden gut ache. The look on her face was the hardest he had seen in her so far. What do you mean she was raped and beaten? She was the heir to Winterfell. How could that have been allowed to happen? The Boltons already had Winterfell, he pointed out. Sansa was only there to add a little Stark legitimacy, but Ramsay Bolton was not like other men. He was a sadistic shit who deserves to die the worst possible death, she interjected, reaching for Needle as if Ramsay Bolton was in the room with them. Jon got up, calming her. He's already dead. Sansa killed him when we took back Winterfell. She's killed Petyr Baelish too, as it happens. For a long moment, Dr was silent. It was as if she was trying to comprehend the new Sansa who was hardened enough to kill. Good, was all she said in reply. How did she kill him? She fed him to a dragon, he explained. The same dragon that's been flying around Seagard, as it happens. He realized that the time had come. It was the early hours of the morning, but neither of them were sleeping, and no one else would be around for a goodly while yet. In that time, he would have to tell her everything that had happened to him, and what led to them having access to a dragon in the first place. Before that, he wanted them both to be comfortable. He fed a few more pine logs to the fire, and stoked it back into life. Then he poured them both some hot and spiced wine, his hands shaking as he decanted it into 2 pewter goblets. All the while, Arya watched him, her large gray eyes following him about the room as he pulled up 2 chairs beside the fire. The grew later and the room got colder, so they'd be needing the flames. Arya, he said, handing her one of the goblets of spice wine. I found out who my mother was. Accepting the cup, she smiled easily. But that's a good thing, isn't it? Why do you look so sad? Jon motioned for her to sit down. My mother was your Aunt Lyanna. Arya gasped again, a wordless show of surprise, as her eyes widened to the shape of saucers. Oh, she said. But Father wouldn't do that. He's not that sister fucker Jaime Lannister or a tar. The realization dawned on her face like fast-spreading mortification, leaving the rest of her sentence unspoken. Oh, she said again. Oh, Jon. Rhaegar Targaryen. But that man, the one I spoke to earlier, the one downstairs, but it's impossible. How? Why? I am not your sister anymore. She grew increasingly agitated as she tried to make sense of it until Jon guided her into a seat by the fire. You will always be my little sister, he assured her, mussing up her hair again. This time, it didn't make her laugh. But listen, I want to tell you everything. Sansa sat at the high table in the great hall, inspecting the hastily prepared dishes of food before passing them to the lower table. Given the short notice, her kitchen staff had come up with the goods. There was bacon, eggs fried and scrambled in butter, fresh bread meant for breakfast, honeycombs, and plenty of chicken dishes. A whole roast chicken was brought before her, and that she passed straight to Sandor Clegane to wash the hastily prepared feast down. Wine had been brought from her own private cellars. A good strong red for the men of the Brotherhood without banners, and a sweet arbor gold for herself and her ladies. At such an early hour of the morning, she chose only a honeycomb and some fresh bread, warm from the ovens, for herself. Meanwhile, the travelers dived into the rest of the food with gleeful abandon, Beric Dondarrion, well enough, from the hand's tourney, when her father was still alive, Thoros of Myr, she remembered only for his flaming sword. With the exception of Sandor, however, the others were new to her. Tom O7 strummed his wood harp and had a lute slung over his back. Gendry was a powerfully built young man of an age with Jon, with a shock of jet black hair and dazzling blue eyes. She reminded him of someone, but she could not put her finger on who. She would have asked him had he not come across so taciturn. However, every so often he glanced up and looked at her before quickly looking away again. It was Sandor who filled her in. A bastard to King Robert's, that one. That made sense. How did he end up with you? He was with your sister until the Brotherhood took them, he explained. Then the Red Woman took him to Dragonstone and almost fed him to Stannis' leeches. Saints' heart skipped a beat. Does he know where Arya is? Where was she when you last saw her? Brienne told me what happened. The man with the scarred face was you, wasn't it? Melisandre won't hurt him here. Tell him that. I will, Sandor replied. As for your sister, wherever she is, she's safe. More than capable of looking after herself. That one is. With that, she finished off her bread roll and sought out Beric and Thoros. They seemed to be the leaders of this strange band of brothers. It seemed Thoros was becoming reacquainted with Melisandre as they were deep in discussion. Conversing in High Valyrian, which she could not understand. Rhaegar spoke it. She remembered, but he was miles away. "Excuse me, sirs," she greeted them. "I wondered if I might have a word." They were seated around the fire, their plates in their laps and horns of ale in their hands. Parting in the middle, they made room for her at their bench. Marwin was there too, also conversing in High Valyrian, but now retreating to the shadows with his large arms folded across his broad chest. "Lady Melisandre and the good maester here have told us all about you, little lady," Thoros of Myr explained. "You've been north of the Wall, seen the dead rise, been to the Three-Eyed Crow, been back in time and beyond. That's quite an adventure, if you don't mind my say-so." On the contrary, she was relieved that Melisandre had spared her the trouble of having to explain all that herself. It had all happened so fast, at a time when she was still so troubled by Ramsay and full of worry for Jon. She felt like she hadn't really learned anything from it all. That had happened in a haze, and she missed the real clues she should have been looking for. "Is that why you're here?" she asked. "To help us defeat the Great Other?" "My brother Brandon is training to take over from Brynden Rivers, and my cousin is rallying the South. We have a dragon for fire, and we're hoping to win 3 more through Daenerys Targaryen. But we still need more men. We need whole armies." "Aye, that's why we came." It was Beric Dondarrion who spoke. He was leaning forward, horn of ale in hand, and gazing through his one eye at the blazing fire. She had heard he was dead, but prone to rising again. "But you'll need more than men and armies to defeat the darkness heading our way, my lady. You'll need more than dragons." Sansa's heart sank. She simply had nothing else she could throw at the others. There was no fire hotter than dragon fire. There was no army bigger than the 7 kingdoms combined. There was literally nothing else they could do but fight. "It's happened before," she stated, glancing between him and Thoros. "There's been another war for the Dawn. Mankind won it before. We can win again, surely." If Jon really is a Yezhorahai, the rest of her sentence died in the silence of the others. For a long moment, all they did was listen to the fire crackling in the hearth, relishing its pallid warmth as best they could in the oncoming winter. Suddenly, to Sansa, the whole place felt colder and darker. "You're still erring on the side of caution with that potion," Marwin eventually said. "I quite understand, but given all you know, all you've seen, it would be very interesting to see what it shows you." She had been about to swallow the shade of the evening before the Brotherhood arrived, but she saw no need to tell Marwin. It sounded like an excuse, even to her own ears. "What potion is this?" inquired Beric. "Shade of the evening," Marwin confirmed. Thoros made a face. "That blue piss the warlocks, of course, are so enamored of. It's worth a try, I suppose." He paused a moment, before adding, "Corsora brought Rhaegar Targaryen back for a reason. Though, I'd wager he knows something about all of this." Sansa remembered something she was once told about Thoros of Myr, that he was sent to Westeros to try and convert Aphros to the faith. Only by the time he arrived, The rebellion had happened, and the fire god would have to wait again. Robert had no interest in the Seven, just as he had little interest in any other gods, but he was just as good a drinker as Thoros of Myr. She also the other time she saw them. "I saw you in a vision the three-eyed crow sent me," she said. "You had my sister in a camp on High Heart, and you were with an albino woods witch. She made a prophecy, and I was in it. She said she saw a maiden at a wedding with purple serpents in her hair. Then she saw me again in a castle made of snow, slaying a savage giant. She had their full attention now, and she pressed the advantage. It was King Joffrey's wedding. The poison was in an amethyst in my hair. The savage giant was Peter Baelish. It was his family sigil, the Braavosi giant. You know her, too. Who was she?" "She can't help you now, little lady," Thoros said, not unkindly. "Prophecy is a dangerous thing. Isn't that right, master?" She looked to Marwin, who nodded his agreement. "A treacherous woman. That's what I've always said about prophecy. Sucking your cock 1 minute, biting it off the next. Begging your pardons, my lady." Sansa waved his apologies away. Gone were the days when a little crudeness offended her more than people rising from the dead to attack the living. However, she was still dismayed that they saw no point in finding the little woods witch again. Beric, on the other hand, remained thoughtfully silent throughout, and spoke only quietly. "She might have a point, you know," he said. He glanced through his one remaining eye at each of them in turn. "Haven't you noticed? She's always there. She was there at Summerhall when the fire happened. She's always hanging around that hill when she knows we'll be there. She was in Lady Stark's visions. She knows the three-eyed crow. She made the prophecy that the prince that was promised would be born from the line of Rhaenyra, an heiress. I've always thought that mad old goat knew more than she was letting on." Everyone was silent for a moment until Sansa said, "If there's even a small possibility that she can help us, then we need to find her again. But she was all the way over in the Riverlands, and so is Jon," she reminded herself. "I'm still interested to know what that potion shows you," said Marwin. "You've seen more of what's out there than any of us." Sansa nodded. "Tomorrow," she replied. "I'll do it tomorrow." It was dawn by the time Jon had explained everything to Arya. Outside, the storm had abated, but the curtain walls were now decorated with straddling seaweed. An outhouse had blown away and debris scattered the yard below. Arya surveyed it all sadly, looking down from the terrace in his chambers. Jon couldn't think what to say to her. Everything he thought of felt so woefully insufficient. Just as he was about to say it anyway, she abruptly looked up at him and smiled. "I don't care," she said. "You're still my brother. You'll always be my brother." The tension broke, and he smiled brightly with relief. "And you'll always be my little sister." He reached out to moss up her hair, but she expertly dodged out of his way. Laughing, she darted through the open terrace doors, forcing him to chase her. He caught her up easily and mussed up her hair more than he'd ever mussed up it before. She squealed with delight, laughing as they ended up wrestling on the chamber floor. Still, he didn't let up, not until a serving girl came to fix their fire. They broke apart, both red in the face and their clothes askew. Both fell into the nearest seats, regaining their composure. Once the servant had made the bed and fixed the fire, she left and they began talking again. "We need Black Walder alive," he told her. "Once we have River Run back under Tully control, however. Then you'll have the Riverlands and you won't need him anymore," she finished the sentence for him. "Then he's all yours," he confirmed. "Think of the Red Wedding when you do what you do, but let this be an end to it. After that, we look north and think of the wars to come." She had had no idea about the others and the armies of the dead, which could only mean no one in the Free Cities knew, or would be prepared to help. "I'll go straight home after River Run is taken. I promise," she said. "After that, will Sansa call her banners and go to war?" Jon hesitated, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. "There's one more thing I haven't told you." "What?" she asked. He could even see her guard being thrown back up, bracing herself for bad news. It only served to make him feel worse. "You said I'll always be your brother," he said, "but Sansa is different." Arya's face clouded. "What do you mean? Is she still being a bitch toward you after everything you've done?" "No," he cut in, abruptly. "Quite the opposite, in fact. But that's the best. It means she loves you after all. I mean, she did anyway, but she was so proper about it all the time. I think it was because of Mother. But you said, even Mother approves of you now that she's been brought back, like you and Rhaegar were." "That's just it," Jon agreed. We do love each other. I am the heir to the House Targaryen. She is Lady of Winterfell and Wardeness of the North. But even all that to one side, we love each other. A number of expressions chased themselves across Arya's face as she picked up on what he was hinting at. To his dismay, there was more than a trace of disgust there. You mean you love each other? Jon faltered and only managed a small nod. Ever since we worked together and she helped me learn the truth of my parents and then I helped her take back Winterfell, we got to know each other all over again. And I love her, Arya. We're doing nothing wrong. She still looked far from certain, going so far as to back away from him as if she was about to flee. But she didn't. When she came to me, she was broken, he continued. She'd been sold, beaten, and raped. Bolton almost killed her. And when she reached me, she was told that I would die, but she never gave up and crossed the wall. Risked her life again to reach Brandon north of the wall, all to reach me and help me find my way back. I would never have survived this without her. And once this is all over, I never wanted to be parted from her again, or from you, but for different reasons. Arya sighed, her shoulders dropping again as she relaxed. After another second, she came back to him and covered his hands with her own. All that matters is that we're back together. After that, we'll all be all right.